Chapter 1074. Since they had already discussed the conditions, the relationship between them was naturally completely different. As such, the teleportation tree door said to Luo Fan, "This isn't the place to talk. Come with me, fellow." As it spoke, it raised its hand and pointed at its main body, which was the shockingly huge tree. The space-time in front of it distorted and formed a space-time gate. The space-time gate was extremely stable. It floated in the air and looked like a real door. A very strange aura seeped out from behind the space-time gate. The aura was very similar to the aura of this space-time, but there was a subtle difference. It was as if it was born from the same source as this space-time, but had developed in different directions. Luo Fan wanted to take a look at this dojo. Although the new space-time in front of him was completely unfamiliar, he did not hesitate at all. He lifted his foot and stepped into the space-time gate. As soon as he stepped in, a strange wave swept through his body. The space-time around him rippled slightly. In a trance, he had arrived at a brand new space-time. This space-time was very strange. It was different from the space-time he had been in before. It was like a huge spherical space. There were light curtains in all directions in this space. Light and shadows flowed on them, showing the scenes of worlds and space-time. There were exactly 36,000 light screens. No more, no less. They corresponded to the 36,000 space-times that existed in this dojo. Luo Fan arrived at the spherical space and looked at the 36,000 light curtains that were arranged into a spherical shape. He could not help but exclaim, "There's a central platform like this." Back then, Senior Divine Child operated the entire dojo from here, right? Not really. This place wasn't formed when Master was around. This place evolved naturally because of the connection between my main body and me over 1,000,000,000 years. It's where Master usually stayed. It's in another place, a cave abode that can't be entered unless it's a refined dojo. Although Master has left for 1,000,000,000 years, I still can't open the door to that cave abode. The teleportation tree door condensed next to Luo Fan. He shook his head and sighed. When Luo Fan heard this, he was slightly surprised. He carefully observed the space-time and found that the structure of this space-time did not seem to be man-made. Many of the structures contained mysteries that Luo Fan could not understand, but many of the structures seemed to be somewhat imperfect. The difference between it and those exquisite structures was just too great. Such a difference was not the work of an ordinary cultivator. Only a naturally formed and evolved structure could produce such a change. This space-time can be said to be the center of the 36,000 space-time. It can also be considered the core. The existence of this space and time is completely supported by my body. If something happens to my body, this area of space-time will disappear, and the 36,000 space-times will also lose their stability. The power of many space-times will be out of balance, and in the end, there will be serious consequences. The old man looked at the 36,000 light screens and said helplessly. Luo Fan nodded. He released his perception and filled the entire space-time. Surrounding the 36,000 light screens, he carefully sensed the mysteries of these light screens and the principles of their structure. These light screens were not ordinary space-time portals. They were a kind of condensation of time and space. This condensation had the function of a space-time gate. It could communicate between this spherical space and various space-times, allowing the teleportation tree door to transfer living beings and matter between the spherical space and various space-times. However, in addition to this, these light screens could also show various things inside each space-time. They could display all the scenes of the space-time at will, and they could reflect the specific reality of each space-time. From this point of view, these light screens could be regarded as projections of the various space-times. Luo Fan looked at these light screens and swept his eyes. He had already seen the characteristics of the 36,000 space-times. Not all of the 36,000 space-times looked the same as the space-time that Luo Fan had passed through before. In fact, the space-time that Luo Fan had passed through before was the most special and inconspicuous one among the 36,000 space-times. The other space-times had various appearances. Some were completely a boundless ocean, some were a boundless continent, and some were even a boundless void, a sea of fire, thick fog, lightning, and so on and so forth. There were all kinds of strange things, and each was different. There were living beings living in each of these space-times. However, because of the different environments, the types of living beings, the number of living beings, and the strength of the living beings were all different. For example, in some space-times, the strongest experts could even reach the level of the Sage-to-Be realm. In some space-times, the living beings were even weaker than the continent that Luo Fan had stayed in for 14 years. There were even no living beings equivalent to cultivators. There were all kinds of strange and different space-times arranged in front of him. It was no wonder that the transmission tree gate had not discovered that the space-time that Luo Fan had passed through before contained the mysteries that he had dreamed of. The development of these space-times is in a myriad of forms. Some of them seem to have been specially cultivated by Senior Divine Son of Ti, while some of them naturally evolved into what they are today. Luo Fan said, while looking at these light screens. Exactly. Among them, there are 36 space-times that have been carefully cultivated by Master. The transmission tree gate was quite surprised that Luo Fan could see this. As it spoke, it raised its hand and pointed. The 36 light screens that were evenly distributed in all directions of the sphere lit up. These 36 light screens corresponded to the 36 space-times that had the highest level of life forms among the 36,000 space-times. Among them, the weakest and the strongest living beings had reached the Sage-to-Be realm. According to the strongest space-time, the strongest living beings had even reached the Tao integration realm, which was equivalent to the intermediate Sage-to-Be realm. That incomparably powerful aura also gave Luo Fan quite a bit of pressure, causing his expression to slightly freeze. It really is these, Luo Fan lamented. It would take a lot of effort to cultivate even one of these space-times. Even his law realm was far from being comparable to any of them. However, there were as many as 36 of them, and there were even more space-time existences that were only slightly inferior to them. How could he not be moved by this? These 36 space-times. At this moment, Luo Fan had to be very careful when entering any of them. Of course, this also meant that he would be able to obtain considerable benefits when he entered and would be able to better understand the mysteries of the cultivation of the Divine Son. If he had not made a deal with the transmission tree gate, he would definitely have entered one of the space-times to have a look. However, now that he had made a deal with the transmission tree gate, with the promise of the transmission tree gate and the many experiences and insights that the Divine Son had imprinted in the source of the dojo, the importance of these space-times had naturally been greatly reduced. Because of this, although Luo Fan was deeply moved at this time, his expression did not change because of this, and he still remained calm. "What do you plan to do, Taoist?" Luo Fan lamented. He said to the transmission tree gate, "I want to break through the shackles, so I need boundless merit. The merit that belongs to Master's dojo is much more than that of the space-time consciousness breaking free from the shackles." The transmission tree gate's eyes lit up. After billions of years of development, this dojo had already formed its own unique system. Even the structure of many space-times had changed to form this core space-time. Its essence was naturally vastly different from before, and its degree of completeness was incomparable to that of the dojo back then. This dojo was actually equivalent to a brand new, almost perfect world that was completely different from the Earth's universe. Such a world had its own system and was already unbreakable. It was already unbreakable. Unless one could become the master of this world, one would have to follow the rules of this world if one wanted to obtain something from it. Merit was just like this. That was it. If a living being refined this dojo and became its owner, they would naturally be able to assign as much merit to the transmission tree gate as they wished, allowing the spiritual consciousness of the transmission tree gate to break free from the shackles of the body and obtain true freedom. However, since Luo Fan wasn't willing to do that, then if he wanted to obtain merit, He could only be like the ordinary living beings in the Taoist grounds and bring a huge amount of benefits to the Taoist grounds in order to obtain merit. Luo Fan could not be bothered to think too much and directly said to the transmission tree gate, "Since you know this dojo better, you should know what to do to obtain enough merit, right?" What he said was naturally true. A spiritual consciousness that had existed for billions of years lived in this Taoist right ground at all times and witnessed the entire evolution of this Taoist right ground. Who would believe that he did not understand this Taoist right ground and did not know what to do in order to obtain a large amount of merit in this Taoist right ground? The transmission tree gate frowned and said, "This matter needs to be considered at length. I only learned from you today that I should seek merit. In the past, although I have seen the various changes of time and space in this dojo, I have never considered it from the perspective of merit. This matter is complicated for a while, but I can't completely straighten it out. I wonder if you can teach me?" As he spoke, he actually turned the question to Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked at the transmission tree gate and knew that it would take a long time to fully consider this problem. It might even take a few years, a few decades, or even a few hundred years. He was the transmission tree gate. Although he had different uses, he was still the spiritual consciousness of a tree. His concept of time was obviously not the same as that of ordinary living beings. Of course, Luo Fan did not want to wait here for the transmission tree gate to think things through, so he immediately said, "This matter is not difficult. In order to obtain the merit of heaven and earth, one must contribute to the heaven and earth. In order to contribute to the heaven and earth, one must either help the heaven and earth perfect and grow, or eliminate the shortcomings of the heaven and earth. It's nothing more than that." The transmission tree gate could not help but nod and looked at Luo Fan expectantly. After listening to fellow Taoist words, the originally complicated and disorderly matters have become clear at a glance. "I hope you can continue to teach me." Luo Fan smiled faintly and said, "Next, it's fellow Taoist business. I've only stepped into this dojo for less than a day, so how can I be as familiar with this dojo as you are with it? Where are the shortcomings of this dojo? How will it evolve next? And how can it be improved and strengthened? Only you know these." The transmission tree gate frowned and pondered carefully. As a spiritual consciousness born from a tree, his spiritual intelligence was not low. However, the speed at which he thought about problems was not comparable to that of ordinary cultivators. So at this time, he could not think of what to do. Luo Fan looked at it and could not help but secretly shake his head. From the looks of it, if he really waited for him to think it through, he did not know how many years it would take. Helpless, he could only say, "Although this dojo has been developed for tens of trillions of years, there must still be many imperfections. For example, the direction in which the various space-times interact with each other, or some damage caused by the long-term development of each space-time. These are all points that can be used to obtain merit." "I see. Fellow Taoist is wise." The transmission tree gate was suddenly enlightened, and his eyes lit up. At this time, his eyes looked around and noticed the interior of this spherical space. This spherical space looked so mysterious, but it was obviously not developed to the extreme. Many of its structures had not reached the most perfect state, and so on and so forth. Obviously, the interior of such a spherical space was a huge merit point. Luo Fan saw that the transmission tree gate's eyes were focused on the interior of the spherical space, and he let out a sigh of relief. He felt an inexplicable joy like a rotten wood that had finally been enlightened. When this joy arose, Luo Fan could not help but secretly smile bitterly. He originally thought it would be an easy thing, but now it seemed that it was a little troublesome. As expected, just as this thought flashed through his mind, the transmission tree gate said with some embarrassment, "How should the space-time change to make it more perfect? I hope fellow Taoist can continue to teach me." Luo Fan had already expected this. He sighed and said, "My willpower is not enough, and my strength is not enough. If fellow Taoist trust me, lend me your strength. When I see the truth of this space-time, we will discuss how to improve this space-time." The transmission tree gate nodded repeatedly. "As long as fellow Taoist needs it, feel free to take it." With that, he raised his hand and grasped at the void. From all directions, wisps of green light condensed in his hand, and in the blink of an eye, a palm-sized green tree shadow condensed in his palm. The appearance of this tree shadow was very strange. Although it was the size of a palm, it gave people the feeling that it filled the world, and there was even a charm that spanned across endless space-time coming from it. Looking at this tree shadow, Luo Fan found that this tree shadow was different from the tree he saw in the beginning of the space-time. Not only did it appear larger, more mysterious, and more majestic, but also felt like it was condensed from countless small bodies. Obviously, the overall appearance of the transmission tree gate was fundamentally different from that space-time clone. This is my projection. Fellow Taoist, if you control this projection, you can borrow my body and my strength. The transmission tree gate handed the tree shadow to Luo Fan without hesitation. From the looks of it, it trusted Luo Fan a lot and was not worried that Luo Fan would use its projection to do something harmful to him. Luo Fan sighed. If the transmission tree gate seemed hesitant, he would not have the heart to do anything. But seeing how open and trusting it was, he felt a little embarrassed not to do anything. With a sigh, he took the tree shadow and poured his will into it. At this moment, he felt his perception begin to expand infinitely. In the blink of an eye, it had already expanded tens of thousands of times, directly enveloping the entire dojo in his perception. The 36,000 space-times in the dojo, as well as this spherical space, were all revealed in his mind. He could even faintly feel that there was a layer of space-time above the 36,000 space-times. This layer of space-time was vague, seemingly real and illusory. It was extremely strange. He wanted to grasp it, but he felt that the space-time was slippery. He could not completely lock onto it. He could only feel that the space-time was unimaginably mysterious, but he could not see it clearly at all, let alone get close to it. This must be the Divine Sun's cave abode, Luo Fan thought. The relationship between the dojo and the cave abode was one of inclusion and the other of inclusion. The dojo was a place to cultivate and seek the Tao. For cultivators, it was usually a space-time, a world of its own. For the disciples of the sages, it was directly opened up in a state of chaos, a place similar to a perfect world attached to the Earth's universe. And the cave abode was where cultivators lived and lived. Generally speaking, it existed in a certain location in the dojo. This was for cultivators with dojos. For cultivators without dojos, their cave abode actually had both functions of a dojo and a cave abode. For example, Luo Fan had only opened up a few cave abodes in the past, but he had never thought of specifically opening up a dojo for cultivation. Of course, after opening up many worlds and lands, they already had the function of a dojo to a certain extent, but he was not completely sure of the concept of a dojo. Due to the difference between a dojo and a cave abode, a dojo usually contained the Tao and principles of a cultivator, while a cave abode contained the tools of a cultivator for daily life and cultivation. For example, magic treasures, ancient books that he had collected, and all sorts of magical powers that he had created. In order to obtain the greatest benefits from the owner of a dojo, one could only obtain a portion of the enlightenment from the dojo. Only by entering the cultivator's cave abode could one obtain all the benefits left behind by the owner of the dojo. Chapter 1075. As his thoughts turned, Luo Fan did not immediately start looking for the cave mansion. Instead, he turned his attention to the entire dojo and began to analyze in detail. This analysis process lasted for a full 3 days and 3 nights. After waiting for 3 days and 3 nights, Luo Fan slowly came back to his senses and said, "There are several damages in every part of the space in this dojo. Perhaps they will recover in the following long years, but they are what fellow Taoists will rely on to obtain merit. Moreover, there are also many flaws in this space that need to be fixed. We may not be able to fix all the flaws, but we can definitely greatly reduce the extent of the flaws. This is also a merit. Although there are many others, they are generally not as good as these two. I think we should first obtain these 2 merit and see if it's enough before looking at the other merit. What do you think?" Of course, 3 days and 3 nights were nothing compared to billions of years. Therefore, during these 3 days and 3 nights, the teleportation tree door did not move at all, nor did it become impatient. Instead, it stood quietly by the side and waited for Luo Fan. At this moment, Luo Fan had clearly stated what he wanted to do after returning. This made the teleportation tree door overjoyed and said, "That's perfect. Let's begin." As he spoke, he hesitated and said, "However, I have a question. Why is every space-time damaged? The operation of all space-times is extremely smooth and mysterious. They complement each other and have developed for so many years. How can there be such damage that looks like hidden injuries?" Luo Fan originally thought there was a problem, but he did not expect it to be so simple. He could not help but smile and said, "What's so difficult about this? There are living creatures in these space-times. There are even cultivators in almost all of them. Of course, it's impossible for everything to be peaceful over billions of years. Every space-time must have experienced countless wars that spread across the entire space-time, or it could be said that there were countless calamities. In such wars, in such calamities, isn't it normal for powerful living creatures to damage space-time and leave hidden injuries in it?" "I see. I didn't think of that." The teleportation tree door came to a sudden realization. Luo Fan smiled and comforted him. The teleportation tree door, with a wave of his hand, he created a screen of light in the air. This light curtain revealed a spherical space. This spherical space was surrounded by 36,000 light curtains. It was the space-time where Luo Fan and the teleportation tree gate were. However, compared to the real space-time, this light and shadow was densely packed with tiny martial arts lines. These lines were not anything else. This was the structure of the laws of space and time. Luo Fan casually pointed with his finger, and the countless lines that represented the laws of the light screen began to move like an extremely complicated mechanical gear. The changes involved in the process of swimming were extremely complicated and mysterious. As they changed, there was a faint aura of perfection that was becoming more and more obvious. The teleportation tree gate looked at the light screen and instantly understood Luo Fan's meaning. It hurriedly imprinted all the changes of these lines into the depths of its memory. He continued to absorb it. After a long time, the changes on the light screen stopped, and the teleportation tree gate slowly closed its eyes. After another half a day, the teleportation tree gate opened its eyes, bowed to Luo Fan, and said, "It is my great fortune to be able to meet fellow Taoists. Regardless of whether this matter succeeds or not, the reward I promised before will not be short of fellow Taoists." At this moment, indeed, he felt incomparably fortunate. As the teleportation tree gate, he was not an ordinary cultivator. He was not even a cultivator. He was just a strange creature that was similar to the treasure spirit of a magic treasure. This kind of life essence limited his cultivation prospects. Although he had existed for trillions of years and had all the comprehension and experience of the God Son who had stepped onto the 9th step, his own abilities were still limited to his body. So much so that he only had the ability but not the cultivation. Under such circumstances, although he was almost omnipotent in this dojo, his own understanding of the Tao was extremely poor. The specific modification process of the spherical space that Luo Fan had just shown was like reading a book from the heavenly book to the teleportation tree gate. With a single glance, he knew that if he could deduce even 1% of the modification process, it would already be an extraordinary feat. In fact, it was even more likely that he would cause greater damage to the spherical space, causing the spherical space to become even more flawed due to his modification. In that case, he would not be able to obtain merit. He would already be extremely lucky if he did not attract boundless negative karma. It was precisely because he understood his own shortcomings that he felt that he was so lucky. He felt that it was Luo Fan's good fortune to be able to set foot here this time. Luo Fan smiled and said, "You're exaggerating. It's my good fortune to be able to set foot here and meet you." The teleportation tree gate bowed to Luo Fan again and thanked Luo Fan before straightening up. As he straightened up, The interior of the entire spherical space began to gradually fill with an increasingly rich and powerful aura of flesh and blood. Luo Fan could even faintly hear the thunderous sound of qi and blood flowing in a very distant place. In an instant, Luo Fan knew that the teleportation tree gate was going to begin to modify the spherical space according to his previous deduction. This was also an experiment to see if Luo Fan's deduction was correct. He wanted to see if he could obtain merit from this transformation and how much merit he could obtain. If Luo Fan's deduction was correct and this modification could obtain enough merit, it meant that the modification of the other 36,000 spacetimes could also obtain a large amount of merit. It meant that the future of the teleportation tree gate would be extremely bright after it transcended the shackles of its own body. And this was obviously crucial to the teleportation tree gate. With a slight thought, Luo Fan took a step forward and crossed a distance of tens of thousands of feet in an instant, arriving at a position near the edge of the spherical space. The entire modification process was deduced by Luo Fan. He naturally knew where to stand during the modification process would receive the smallest image, and he would be able to see all the details of the entire modification process perfectly. When Luo Fan arrived at this position, the teleportation tree gate reacted. It hurriedly apologized for ignoring Luo Fan, and then a stream of flesh and blood aura was added to Luo Fan's body, firmly protecting him and completely isolating him from all the changes in the outside space-time. Luo Fan naturally smiled in response. He didn't care. After all, although his body was extremely fragile at this time, his will and consciousness were extremely tough. Even without any protection, he didn't even need to stand in the least affected area. There wouldn't be any fatal effects, and at most, he would be a little embarrassed. Under such circumstances, how could he be dissatisfied with the teleportation tree gate's neglect? After protecting Luo Fan, the teleportation tree gate began to adjust the laws of the entire spherical space according to Luo Fan's deduction. This kind of adjustment was carried out in an orderly manner. Everything in this spherical space was being carried out in an extremely weak manner at every moment. However, the changes couldn't be stopped. The process of change was so mysterious that ordinary cultivators wouldn't even be able to see the specific changes. They would only feel that the space seemed to be compressing a long period of time, and that every second was equivalent to an unknown number of years. However, for an existence like Luo Fan, the entire process of change was extremely gorgeous. It was extremely grand and vast. All the subtle changes in the laws were proof of Luo Fan's previous deduction and verification of Luo Fan's various understandings of the dojo. Looking at all the changes in the laws, Luo Fan felt that his understanding of the dojo and the path of flesh and blood was constantly deepening at every moment. He even vaguely felt that his accumulation was becoming more robust, and the resistance he faced to increase his cultivation realm was becoming smaller and smaller. Although the changes in the laws were very small every moment, after dozens of days of accumulation, the changes in the laws were very small. It caused the entire space to undergo an earth-shattering change. After dozens of days, all the laws were finally adjusted by the teleportation tree gate and gradually reached the location that Luo Fan had deduced. The entire spherical space had changed. It was no longer as spacious as before. There were only 36,000 light screens in the spherical space. Instead, it had turned into a huge tree. It was a huge tree that was rooted in the void. It had lush branches and a huge trunk, but its height was not proportional to the trunk. It vaguely looked like a forest with 36,000 branches, and each branch extended into a strange light screen. This tree was incomparably huge and magnificent. It even vaguely gave off the feeling that it was boundless. Luo Fan was currently at the junction between the trunk and one of the branches of the tree. His 8-foot-tall figure was like an ant standing on a football field on the branch. If one used the perspective of a normal creature and looked into the distance, they wouldn't even be able to see the end of the branch. He even felt like he was standing on a boundless, flat land from this. one could tell just how enormous and majestic this tree was. So that's how it is. This must be the main body of the teleportation tree gate that was materialized from an abstract concept. Luo Fan could not help but lament as he sensed the changes in the entire space. Although he had designed all the changes in the laws of the space, and every bit of it was shaped by his deduction process was completely based on the law of the space's development. However, his entire deduction process was completely in accordance with the laws of the space's development. He completely followed the direction of the space's most perfect structure, eliminated some of the inferior structures, and tried his best to change the direction of the space's most perfect structure. Such a change would definitely allow this space to develop in a better direction. However, before all the changes were fully revealed, even Luo Fan did not know how the space would develop under the changed laws. Hence, the huge tree in front of him was beyond Luo Fan's expectations. This big tree looked exactly the same as a real tree, but there was a huge difference in size. However, in reality, the tree was not a real tree, but a very strange form of existence that was similar to the original shape of the space. In other words, it looked like a tree, but it only looked like a tree. What was under Luo Fan's feet was not the tree itself. It was not wood, but a very strange space. It was almost nothingness, but it had substance that could not be described with words. It could be said that the tree was actually the shape of the space, and it was no different from the previous spherical space. Just as Luo Fan was thinking about the shape of the tree, a burst of joyful laughter came from the void. Then, boundless golden light quickly gathered in the direction of the laughter, finally forming a huge wheel of light. The wheel of light was huge. It could even be compared to the tree. It looked like a sun had suddenly appeared in this space, and it was a sun that was very close to the ground. In the center of the wheel of light, the shadow of an old man appeared out of thin air. The shadow of the old man was very illusory at first, but as the wheel of light became more and more dazzling, the figure of the old man became more and more distinct. It became more and more real. In the end, just as the old man was about to completely condense into a real form, the golden light that had condensed from nothingness and caused the wheel of light to grow and become brighter and brighter suddenly stopped appearing. The old man could only maintain this form that was half illusory and half real. It was not completely illusory, but it was not completely real either. The old man's laughter came to an abrupt stop at this moment. His expression was a little helpless, a little regretful, and a little surprised. This golden light was none other than merit, and it was an extremely large, almost boundless merit. This merit was compared to what he had obtained in that space-time. The merit that could condense into the divine throne of merit was tens of thousands of times more. If it was placed on those great consciousnesses, it was enough to allow countless great consciousnesses to transcend the shackles of all spirits, condense their consciousness into a real form, and obtain true freedom. But for this old man, it was only on the teleportation tree door that it could allow its spiritual consciousness to slightly break away from the shackles of its body, condensing into this half-illusory, half-real, and seemingly non-existent figure. From this, it could be seen how much merit was needed for the teleportation tree door to truly transcend the shackles and obtain true freedom. Although the teleportation tree door sighed, it was more surprised. At this moment, although it had not succeeded in allowing its consciousness to completely break away from the shackles, it was still showing signs of doing so. This was clearly an excellent start. Moreover, this was only the first merit item. There were other merit items in the following 36,000 spacetimes. If he continued like this, he would be able to obtain enough merit to condense a real body of consciousness. How could he not be pleasantly surprised? With a slight thought, the merit light wheel behind the teleportation tree door's head began to rapidly compress. In a short while, it had already filled the entire space and was almost comparable to the size of the large tree. In the end, it was compressed to a diameter of only 3 feet and floated behind its head. With such a shocking compression rate, the result was that the merit light wheel was almost solid after being compressed. Although the light was not as dazzling, It seemed to be solid. Every rotation seemed to push the space-time around it, causing the space-time around the old man to inexplicably distort and fluctuate inexplicably. Just like this, it was different from the mortal world. Many thanks for your help, fellow Taoist. The old man arrived in front of Luo Fan and respectfully bowed to Luo Fan. Luo Fan supported the teleportation tree door and said, "You are too kind. This is a win-win situation for both of us, so there is no need to be so polite." The old man stood up and grabbed at the air. In an instant, the entire dojo trembled slightly, as if this action had affected the 36,000 space-times in the dojo. Following that, a strange crystal flew out from the void and appeared directly in the elder's half-real, half-illusory hand. The crystal had an irregular shape and was only the size of a fist. It was crystal clear, but it could not be described with a specific color. The entire crystal gave off a very strange aura, as if it contained the principles of eternity. It was like a giant that stood between the heavens and the earth, filled with a boundless aura of chi and blood. There is also a faint feeling that it could not be worn down by thousands of tribulations, and that it would never die. As soon as the crystal fell into the teleportation tree door's hand, the entire tree trembled slightly, as if it was bearing an unbearable weight. The old man looked at the crystal with an intoxicated look in his eyes. After a while, he used his absolute will to cut off this intoxication and handed the crystal to Luo Fan. He said, "This is the master's lifetime comprehension and experience of the Tao. I spent hundreds of billions of years condensing it from the source of the dojo. Since it has proven that your design can truly allow me to transcend the shackles, I will give this to you first." Since the appearance of the crystal, Luo Fan had already expected it. He felt that this thing was the lifetime comprehension and experience of the Divine Son. At this moment, when he heard the old man's words, his eyes couldn't help but light up. At this moment, the transaction was not completely completed. The old man had only obtained a small part of the many merits, and even his figure had only condensed a small part of it. Logically speaking, the transaction between the two of them was not complete. The old man giving this item to Luo Fan now was not in line with their previous agreement. Theoretically, Luo Fan should have refused the item and waited for the deal to be completed before accepting it. However, this was clearly too unreasonable. Chapter 1076. Anyway, he had no intention of going back on his word. Since the teleportation tree gate was willing to hand over the experience and knowledge to him, he would not reject it pretentiously. Therefore, he merely smiled, thanked the tree gate, and took the crystal. As soon as the crystal touched his hand, he could feel the mysteriousness contained within it. It was as if he was holding a world, a universe. An impatient feeling arose in his heart, and he almost couldn't help but begin to comprehend the experience and knowledge contained within it. Fortunately, he had strong self-control and knew that this was not the time to start comprehending. Therefore, he waved his hand and placed the crystal into his universe in his sleeve. Just as he was about to start the next step, the old man raised his hand to stop Luo Fan. With a wave of his hand, a wooden disc appeared in his hand. This wooden disc was extremely strange. Although it looked like it was made of wood, it faintly emitted a metallic luster. At first glance, it even seemed to be reflecting light. On the front of the wooden disc, countless strange runes were engraved. These strange runes were inconceivable, extremely complex, and extremely mysterious. Moreover, the way they were constructed was not something that existed in this Taoist field, nor was it something that Luo Fan had seen before. Instead, it was something that Luo Fan was very familiar with. It was something that the cultivators of Earth used to record information. Luo Fan took a look at this item and knew that it was the proof of entry to the dojo. It was just that he didn't know how many dojos were recorded on it. The teleportation tree gate didn't even care about the previous Divine Son's experience and knowledge, let alone this proof of entry that he could casually make. He directly handed the item to Luo Fan and said, "This is the proof of entry to each dojo." I'll give it to you as well, so that we don't have to go through the trouble again in the future. Since Luo Fan had already accepted the bulk of the reward, he naturally wouldn't stand on ceremony. Now, Xiao Luo would naturally not stand on ceremony with this reward. He thanked Xiao Luo again and received the disc. This proof of entry was different from the Divine Son's experience and knowledge. Although there was a lot of information contained within, there was no need to comprehend it. Luo Fan took the wooden disc. With a thought, a huge amount of information was instantly poured into his mind. In a trance, Luo Fan already understood the number of Dowrites contained in this wooden disc. Including this god's Dowrites, there were as many as 34 of them. Among them, any one of them was completely different from the dojos that Luo Fan knew from the battle god's son. Luo Fan sensed this. A look of joy appeared on his face. This harvest was too great. The masters of these 34 training grounds had clearly been annihilated in the long river of time. Such an existence must have an extremely high level of cultivation. If one could step into one of these dojos, no matter how unlucky one would still be able to greatly increase one's experience and accumulate a deeper foundation. If he was lucky, he would be able to obtain the comprehension and lifetime experience of those cultivators, just like the dojo of the Divine Son. Then, the harvest would be 1,000 times greater. Holding the wooden disc, Luo Fan secretly rejoiced that he had really made the right choice this time. After putting the wooden disc into the universe in his sleeve with a smile on his face, he said to the teleportation tree gate, "Since you have handed me the reward, let's quickly finish what we have to do next." "Thank you," the teleportation tree gate said happily when it saw that Luo Fan did not immediately start comprehending the crystal. Luo Fan smiled and raised his hand to point in the void. In an instant, a light screen appeared. In this light screen, what appeared was a space-time. This space-time was full of forests and ancient trees. It was the space-time that Luo Fan first stepped into this dojo. This space-time was different from the other 35,999 space-times. There was more than one space-time portal that led to Tian Hunzi's dojo. Among them, the space-time portal on the continent where Luo Fan's soul clone was located was one of them. Although the other portals also led to that dojo, they did not lead to that continent. For another dojo, these portals were something that could be quickly destroyed. However, for the Divine Son of the Divine Son's dojo, it could maintain communication and ensure that it was smooth. However, it could bring endless merit. This caused this space-time to be greatly different from other space-times. This was because in order to repair the damage that these space-times had accumulated over countless years, they needed to block these space-time portals. Blocking these space-time portals would allow them to obtain a huge amount of karma. This was obviously the complete opposite of the teleportation tree gate's requirements. Therefore, this space-time had to be treated specially. At the very least, the entire process could not be completely handed over to the teleportation tree gate. Luo Fan still needed to block these space-time portals. After all, the boundless karma of this dojo was bad luck for the teleportation tree gate, and it was something that it could not avoid. However, for Luo Fan, it was a great thing. It could greatly increase the merit of the continent that belonged to Tian Hunzi's dojo. This was obviously a win-win situation. After Luo Fan opened the light screen, the teleportation tree gate focused all its attention on the light screen and carefully watched how Luo Fan evolved and repaired it. If it could be said that the teleportation tree gate was a little absent-minded when Luo Fan was evolving, then after tasting the benefits of Luo Fan's evolution, it no longer had the slightest bit of carelessness. At this moment, even the slightest tremble of Luo Fan's body was completely engraved in his heart. He was even secretly deducing the deeper meaning of this tremble and what profound mysteries it had. Luo Fan said to the teleportation tree gate, "There are 8 space-time portals that lead to Tian Hunzi's dojo. In order to perfect this space-time, we need to block these 8 space-time portals. If you do it, it will definitely attract boundless karma and damage your merit. Therefore, I will block these 8 space-time portals." How can I bear to do that? If this boundless karma attaches itself to you, won't it bring misfortune to you? I think it's better to let go of this space-time and let it remain like this. How about not repairing it? Anyway, there's still 35,999 space-times. All the merit added up should be enough for me to transcend the shackles. The teleportation tree gate hurriedly said. Luo Fan shook his head. You're wrong, fellow Taoist. Although there are still so many space-times, it's even harder to determine how much merit can be obtained after completely repairing it. This space-time doesn't seem important, but we can't give it up. As for the karma, you don't have to worry about it. This boundless karma is karma to you, but it is merit to me. If you don't believe me, look at this. As he said that, he raised his hand and pointed behind him. His originally hidden merit light will suddenly shone brightly and revealed its form. However, this merit light will look similar to the color behind the teleportation tree gate's head, but its aura was somewhat incompatible with the entire dojo. There was also a faint and indescribable pressure coming from the entire dojo. It acted on the merit light wheel as if it wanted to completely crush it. The teleportation tree gate instantly came to a realization when it saw this merit light wheel. It knew that this merit light wheel was the merit light wheel of another dojo, and its nature was the same as the nature of the karma inside this divine son's dojo. If it could be replenished with the boundless karma of this dojo, this merit light wheel would grow greatly, and it might even reach the level of the merit light wheel behind its head. After understanding this, it heaved a sigh of relief and no longer opposed Luo Fan's decision. After persuading the teleportation tree gate, Luo Fan casually eliminated the 8 space-time portals. After that, the laws of that space-time began to evolve in a deeper level. This evolution process was extremely meticulous and extremely detailed, and almost all the details were included in it. After a long time, the entire evolution process was finally completed. However, it was only the completion of the evolution process. The final appearance of that space-time was a blur, and this was something that even Luo Fan couldn't deduce, just like the original spherical space. Although Luo Fan had deduced the evolution process of all the laws, the spherical space ultimately turned into the appearance of this big tree. He also couldn't think of this. Seeing that Luo Fan's deduction was complete, the teleportation tree gate closed its eyes and tried hard to engrave the entire process in its mind, trying hard to remember the entire unimaginably complex evolution process. After another half a day, it finally let out a long breath. A confident smile appeared on its face. The repair process of a huge space-time was much more difficult than the repair process of the spherical space. After all, there is a huge difference in the number of laws contained in a huge space-time and the number of laws contained in a spherical space. This difference resulted in the difference in complexity between the two and also caused a huge difference in the difficulty of the two. The reason that the teleportation tree gate was able to complete the memory in such a short time was mostly because of the huge amount of merit that it had obtained previously. Although the most important reason that it sought merit was to free itself from the shackles of its main body and obtain true freedom. However, that did not mean that merit only had this effect. In fact, the wonderful use of merit was almost endless. When there was a sufficient amount, it could even allow ordinary living beings to directly become immortals, and it could allow cultivators to directly break through realms. Helping the teleportation tree gate remember the complicated changes was just a simple matter. I've completely memorized it, the teleportation tree gate said to Luo Fan. All right, since you've memorized it, let's get started. Luo Fan nodded and took a light step forward. Qi and blood surged around his body, and in the blink of an eye, he arrived on the branch that led to the space-time. He faced the light screen that was displaying all the changes inside the space-time. When Luo Fan borrowed the teleportation tree gate's body and power, he already had a very deep understanding of the dojo. Although he no longer had the body and power, he could still perform some limited control over the dojo. In other words, he had used his previous experience to obtain a part of the authority of the dojo. This authority might not allow him to obtain the enlightenment and experience that the Divine Sun had imprinted in the depths of the dojo's origin, but it was not too difficult for him to control a certain space-time and block some space-time gates. Standing in front of the light screen, Luo Fan lifted his hand and gently swiped it, causing the light and shadow on the light screen to change rapidly. In the end, it was divided into 8 parts and revealed 8 space-time gates. These space-time gates were not all the same. Some were whirlpools, some were pools of water, and some were even transparent disks. There were all kinds of them, and no two were exactly the same. Looking at the 8 space-time gates, Luo Fan lifted his hand and pointed at them. In an instant, the 8 gates shook violently. The shaking did not only happen on the light screen, but also in the entire space-time. It was as if there was a strong earthquake that affected the entire space-time, and all living beings could feel the tremors. For a time, terrified howls could be heard from all over the space-time. Even though Luo Fan was standing in front of the light screen, he could hear the terrifying howls. Amidst the howls, the 8 space-time gates began to shake. The shaking was very weak at first, and it was extremely indiscernible. However, in the end, it became stronger and faster. In the end, it seemed to connect together, causing the edges of the space-time gates to become extremely blurry, as if there was a fog of light. At this moment, the 8 space-time gates suddenly stopped moving, and then each of them completely turned in a fog of light. An extremely strong space-time fluctuation was produced from where the 8 space-time gates were, and it instantly swept through the entire space-time. It allowed all living beings and consciousness in the entire space-time to instantly understand what was going on. For a time, the howls became even more terrified. "It's done." Luo Fan smiled. As he smiled, the 8 spots of fog in the light screen slowly dissipated, leaving only 8 empty spots that were no different from the other spots. There did not seem to be anything special about them. At this moment, Luo Fan felt an indescribable pressure from the entire dojo, and it directly affected his body. His spirit was above his power. Then, countless black lights appeared out of nowhere and condensed towards him. In the blink of an eye, they wrapped his entire body into a black cocoon of light that grew larger and larger. Within the black light, there were countless mournful howls, violent curses, and accusations. When the teleportation tree door saw the black light, it was shocked, and it could not help but retreat, not daring to touch the black light. "There's actually so much karma. Fortunately, I didn't attack. Otherwise, I'm afraid I wouldn't even be able to keep half of the merit I obtained." At this moment, the teleportation tree door's heart was filled with fear and relief. Inside the black light, Luo Fan sensed the dense and somewhat viscous karma around him, and he shouted loudly. The merit light wheel that appeared behind his head rotated slightly. It began to absorb the surrounding black light wildly. In the blink of an eye, the black light was completely absorbed, and all of it fused into the merit light wheel behind his head, causing it to turn pitch black. One could even faintly see bits of golden light flashing in the pitch black light wheel. There was just too much karma. Although the merit contained in Luo Fan's original merit light wheel was already extremely astonishing, it was still many times less than the amount of karma. Under such circumstances, even if the nature of the negative karma was the same as his merit light wheel, it wouldn't be able to assimilate all the negative karma so quickly. It wouldn't be able to transform all the black negative karma into golden merit in such a short period of time. That was the reason why such a scene had occurred. Under the illumination of the black light well behind his head, Luo Fan could not help but look a little sinister. He stood there, as if his face was covered in black fog, and his eyes were filled with an ominous glint. Feeling the increasingly strong pressure around him, Luo Fan knew that he had to quickly transform the karma into merit, or else he was afraid that the dojo would give him an attack similar to the heavenly tribulation, and that would cause unnecessary problems. He sat down cross-legged, and his body floated in midair. The black light wheel with specks of golden light behind his head began to spin frantically. As it spun, the specks of golden light began to connect into a line and gradually expanded. Meanwhile, the color of the entire black light will begin to gradually change. From its original pitch black color, it gradually turned into a dark gold color, and then gradually turned golden. When all of the black color completely disappeared, and the entire light will return to its original golden appearance, 3 days and 3 nights had already passed. During these 3 days and 3 nights, a layer of black fog continuously gathered above Luo Fan's head, forming a black cloud that was sometimes thicker and sometimes thinner. The cloud emitted a dense, heavenly might, suppressing everything in this space. Even the teleportation tree gate did not dare to approach the black cloud, and it hid far away. This was because he cannot be more clear about it. This was not an ordinary cloud at all, but a tribulation cloud. Furthermore, it was a tribulation cloud that did not leave any life force and completely forced living beings to their deaths. It was a type of tribulation cloud that would not disappear until the living beings that attracted the tribulation cloud were completely destroyed. The appearance of such a tribulation cloud was equivalent to the combined attack of all the power in the dojo. Even though the teleportation tree gate and the dojo were closely connected and had accumulated power for trillions of years, it could not compare to such power at all. Even the slightest contact with it could be a disaster. It could be said that going against such a tribulation cloud was equivalent to going against the entire dojo. Unless there was a living being that could survive the complete destruction of the dojo, no one would be able to survive the attack of the tribulation cloud. Luo Fan's main body might be able to do it, but his projection clone was out of the question. If the tribulation cloud was completely formed and erupted, only death would await him. Fortunately, the tribulation cloud was attracted by Luo Fan's boundless karma. Chapter 1077. When Luo Fan completed the process of converting all the negative karma into merit and opened his eyes, the black mist above his head finally stabilized in a seemingly non-existent state, as if there was an additional layer of gauze above his head. Feeling the faint discomfort around his body, Luo Fan raised his head and noticed the existence of the tribulation cloud. He couldn't help but reveal an indescribable smile on his face. With a slight thought, the virtuous halo behind his head shook, and the gauze-like tribulation cloud scattered in all directions. In the blink of an eye, it disappeared without a trace. He directly used his merit to completely annihilate the tribulation cloud in the sky. After the black mist disappeared, he felt refreshed and the faint discomfort was gone. He couldn't help but feel quite satisfied. He turned his head again and saw the teleportation tree gate standing in the distance. He called out, "My task is completed. It's your turn now." The teleportation tree gate was overjoyed when it heard Luo Fan's call. With a light step, it came to Luo Fan's side. It looked at the merit halo behind Luo Fan's head with envy and said, "If I can convert the karma into merit like you, I won't have to go through so much trouble. Destroying was always easier than building. For this dojo, destroying the dojo would attract karma, while building the dojo would gain merit. Obviously, if the teleportation tree gate could convert karma into merit like Luo Fan, then it wouldn't need to ask Luo Fan to help it. It only needed to casually destroy the time and space to gain enough merit." Luo Fan heard the teleportation tree gate's words and said with a smile, "Why are you envious? This merit is useless in this dojo. It's not much different from karma. You just have to do it. I'm afraid you won't be able to achieve your goal." The teleportation tree gate reacted after hearing that. It couldn't help but smile and nodded without saying anything. "Please," Luo Fan said with a smile. The teleportation tree gate nodded in thanks to Luo Fan, and its half-real figure stood in front of the light screen. His eyes shone with an increasingly dazzling golden light. The golden light penetrated the light screen and entered the strange space-time behind it. With the insertion of the golden light, the image of the entire light screen instantly changed. The general structure was still the space-time, but every inch of the void and every corner of the space-time was covered with countless strange lines. These lines were intertwined and glued together. It seemed chaotic, but it actually contained boundless, inconceivable profundities and it contained practically all the principles of space-time. This was the law of space and time. It was also the existence that the teleportation tree gate needed to adjust and change. The teleportation tree door let out a soft shout after the light screen changed. The energy around him surged. As the power around him surged, there seemed to be all sorts of incredible power gathering in the dojo, directly pouring into the light screen, and began to adjust the laws of space-time. As it adjusted, the entire space-time gradually began to change. This sort of adjustment was rooted in the laws of space and time, and it was the laws of all living beings. All matter was naturally within the range of this adjustment. Therefore, during the adjustment of the laws of space and time, the reaction of the creatures inside the space-time was actually smaller than when Luo Fan eliminated the 8 space-time portals. Only a few creatures could discover the changes that were happening to the space-time. In the eyes of the majority of creatures, the entire world was no different from normal, and there was no change at all. Luo Fan looked at the teleportation tree door that had already begun to adjust the laws of space and found that his method of adjustment was extremely proficient and smooth. There was not the slightest trace of dryness in it. Compared to adjusting the laws of space and time before, it was already much better. He couldn't help but feel quite satisfied. Knowing that he no longer needed to intervene, he sat cross-legged in the air. With a slight thought, he took out the certificate that allowed him to enter and exit dojos and began to study the information on it. Although he wanted to study the sun of God's lifetime of understanding and experience, it would take too much time, and the speed at which the teleportation tree gate transformed that space-time was at most a dozen days. If he were to really comprehend it now, he might have to wake up and demonstrate to the teleportation tree gate how to improve the next space-time. In that case, it was better to use this time to study those dojos. There were as many as 34 dojos on the certificate to enter and exit dojos, and the location of each dojo was constantly changing in a way that Luo Fan couldn't remember or understand. Moreover, the way in which every dojo changed contained many indescribable mysteries. If he could comprehend them, it would be quite beneficial to him. Of course, Luo Fan didn't have much hope for that. After all, this thing had existed for trillions of years and had been studied by countless generations of sages. Countless cultivators who had set foot on the 9 and 9 steps had studied it to no avail. No matter how confident he was, he didn't think that he could surpass everyone and understand it in a short period of time. However, even if he didn't have the confidence to understand it, it was still possible to gain something from it. Looking at the unimaginably complicated changes in the positions of the 34 dojos, Luo Fan suddenly had an idea. He took out the certificate that he had obtained from the battle god Sun and slapped it on the wooden disc. In the blink of an eye, the certificate shattered into dust, and many more Taoist rites appeared on the wooden disc. These dojos were the locations of all the sages, including the battle god Sun's victorious battle palace, Wu Daozi's Qilin Cliff, and so on. With the addition of these, the amount of information contained in the wooden disc increased greatly, and the changes in the positions of the dojos became more and more complicated. It seemed like the changes were completely random and untraceable. Looking at the changes in the positions of these dojos, Luo Fan frowned and pondered. He tried his best to remember the changes in their positions and deduce the various patterns. Time passed slowly in this situation. A month passed in the blink of an eye. It's finally done. On this day, the changes in the threads on the light screen finally calmed down completely. The figure of the teleportation tree door seemed to be even more illusory and unstable than before. The words that it uttered seemed to contain an indescribable sense of relief. Luo Fan opened his eyes and looked at the light screen. He couldn't help but sigh to himself. I thought it would be done in a dozen days, but I didn't expect that repairing a space-time would be much more difficult than I expected. It took me a whole month to complete this task. At this moment, the body of the teleportation tree door trembled. Boundless golden light was born from nothingness and continuously condensed towards the merit light wheel behind the teleportation tree gate's head, causing the light wheel to become more and more substantial. The golden light on it began to grow crazily, becoming more and more dazzling, more and more terrifying. Furthermore, Luo Fan, who was standing at the side, also felt a slight sting in his eyes. He was unwilling to look at the merit light directly. The golden light that had gathered was naturally the merit of the dojo that he had obtained by repairing the space-time. As the merit increased, the somewhat blurry body of the teleportation tree door began to become more and more substantial, more and more like real flesh and blood. The entire dojo began to tremble slightly during this process, as if half of something inexplicable was being extracted from the depths of the dojo. During this process, the teleportation tree door seemed to be extremely comfortable, and an indescribable satisfaction appeared on its face. Its body trembled slightly, as if it was suppressing an indescribable feeling of intoxication. The speed at which the merit condensed was fast and large. In a short while, the merit light wheel behind the teleportation tree door's head had become like a sun. The light that it emitted completely covered the body of the teleportation tree door. At this moment, the merit that was condensing from nothingness suddenly stopped, causing the teleportation tree door to let out a helpless sigh. Unfortunately, it's still not enough. It sighed. Following its sigh, the merit light behind its head began to gradually dim. The golden light began to converge, and finally returned to its previous appearance. The golden light was slightly restrained, and the light seemed to be substantial. Moreover, the entire light was nearly half the size of the original. The figure of the teleportation tree door also appeared. It was more substantial than before, more real, and more like a body of flesh and blood. However, it still appeared translucent and somewhat illusory. Obviously, although it was a step closer to its goal than before, it still hadn't completely broken free from the shackles of its body. It still hadn't obtained complete freedom. What a pity! Seeing this, Luo Fan also sighed. Of course, he was actually not surprised. Although the merit from adjusting the spherical space had allowed him to complete half of the project of breaking free from the shackles. However, he didn't think that just half of the merit would allow him to complete the other half of the project. The reason was very simple. It was like drawing a sphere. If the diameter of the sphere was increased to half of its original size, the increased volume wouldn't be the same as the original sphere. Therefore, the fact in front of him was actually within Luo Fan's expectations. However, even if it was within his expectations, he still felt a little regretful when it actually happened. After a moment of regret, the teleportation tree door turned around and said to Luo Fan, "I'll have to trouble you again." Luo Fan didn't stand on ceremony. With a wave of his hand, a light screen appeared in front of him and the teleportation tree door. Another space-time appeared on the light screen. This space-time doesn't have a space-time portal that leads to other dojos, so there's no need for me to repair it. You could directly adjust it, Luo Fan said. As he said this, the space that appeared inside the light screen started to show countless densely packed threads. After these threads appeared, they began to constantly change. As they changed, the entire space-time also began to change in a very inexplicable way. The teleportation tree door looked at the light screen with rapt attention, trying hard to remember all the changes that appeared in the light screen, trying hard to engrave them in the depths of its heart. These were related to its freedom and its future. The entire process of evolution also lasted for half a day before it stopped. At this time, the space-time that appeared in the light screen was completely blurred. Only the countless threads constructed an extremely complicated and mysterious scene. This was something that even Luo Fan himself was unable to deduce what the world would become after all these changes. After completing the evolution, Luo Fan sighed. This is really a waste of time. It's a pity that you're now even more illusory, and I can't directly transmit information to you through my heart. Otherwise, I wouldn't need to waste so much precious time to evolve. The teleportation tree door tried hard to remember the scene that Luo Fan had evolved before and said, "It's really a waste of time. But I think I won't have to waste time like this very soon. Right now, I'm only a tiny bit away from being able to receive external spiritual messages. I want to obtain merit once again. I want to get merit again, and I should be able to do it. That way, you can relax, and I can relax too. Hearing this, Luo Fan could only nod and sigh. Fortunately, there was still such a hope. Otherwise, if every 36,000 spacetime had to evolve like this, it would take as long as 50 years to evolve the transformation of all the spacetime. And then the teleportation tree door would absorb these memories. So it would need decades, adding on to the transformation process that he didn't know how long. Even a few thousand years wouldn't be enough. Although these thousands of years were nothing to Luo Fan, he had to endure thousands of years of precious experience and comprehension, but he couldn't comprehend it. That kind of feeling was not pleasant no matter how one looked at it. This time, the teleportation tree door tried hard to remember all the changes for half a day, and then began to transform that space-time. As for which space-time? With the teleportation tree door's familiarity with this dojo, it only needed to look at the light screen to know which space-time it was. Naturally, there was no need for Luo Fan to explain it to it. Looking at the teleportation tree door transformed the space-time in front of the light screen, Luo Fan began to sketch on the wooden disc. These sketches did not leave any marks on the surface of the wooden disc, but they caused the information contained in the wooden disc to undergo various subtle changes. These changes were none other than some kind of slight adjustment to the location of Tian Hunzi's dojo. The location of Tian Hunzi's dojo. It was deduced by the battle god Sun, based on a magic treasure that he had obtained from Tian Hunzi. It was a deciphered location, and although it was roughly the same as the real location, there were still some differences after all. It was these differences that made the process of entering the dojo extremely complicated and exhausting. He could not enter and exit as he pleased like other dojos. What Luo Fan was doing now was adjusting the location of this dojo so that it truly matched the location of Tian Hunzi's dojo. This was what Luo Fan had gained from comprehending the information on the wooden disc over the past month. Although the changes in the locations of those dojos were unimaginably complicated, but there was still some connection between them. For example, some dojos would not be close to a certain distance, and some dojos would be fixed at a certain distance. These connections might not be very useful, but it was enough for Luo Fan to roughly determine how far the location of Tian Hunzi's dojo had shifted. Knowing how far it had shifted, he could naturally adjust it. This made it more accurate, allowing him to easily enter and exit Tian Hunzi's dojo. Although Luo Fan already had a grasp of the entire adjustment process, the patterns of changes in those dojos were too fast and complicated. Although he had a grasp of the situation, when Luo Fan finally adjusted the location of Tian Hunzi's dojo to the correct location and established a stable connection with the Divine Sun's dojo, a month had already passed. When he completed the adjustment, the entire dojo shook slightly again. The tree shone with a golden light, and countless merits were produced. Sensing this change, Luo Fan instantly knew that the teleportation tree door had once again completed the space-time repair work. At this time, countless merits appeared in this Taoist, right, and condensed towards him, beginning to transform his will and transform his spiritual sense. Looking up, sure enough, at the entrance of a light curtain, the teleportation tree door had been wrapped in boundless golden light. His entire person seemed to have become a small sun, and even Luo Fan could not see through the light to see what he looked like now. After a while, the light faded and the teleportation tree door's figure appeared. It sighed and said, "Just a little bit more." The teleportation tree door was much more solid and real than before, and the merit light well behind its head was also much larger, more solid, and more restrained than before. However, it still did not achieve its goal. It was still in a state that was half ethereal and half real. It had not truly transcended the shackles and transcended its will. Seeing this, Luo Fan felt a little regretful, but he was more relieved. Of course, he was not happy because the teleportation tree door was unlucky, but because he had now sensed the location of the teleportation tree door's mind, or rather, the location of its will. This meant that he was able to transmit information directly to the teleportation tree door through his mind. In other words, he no longer had to repeat the entire transformation process to the teleportation tree door like before. In fact, the teleportation tree door no longer had to waste time trying to remember everything that Luo Fan had done. As long as Luo Fan transmitted the information to it through his mind, it would be able to remember it firmly and never forget it again. Chapter 1078. After the changes subsided, the teleportation tree door sorted out its emotions and took a light step forward. It arrived in front of Luo Fan and bowed to him, thanking Luo Fan once again. Luo Fan slightly smiled and did not speak. He raised his hand and pointed. In an instant, a thought directly rushed into the mind of the teleportation tree door. Between the thoughts, it was transformed into endless information, directly submerging his entire mind. The amount of information was extremely huge and had reached an unimaginable level. Under normal circumstances, such an amount of information would probably take many years to fully evolve. At this moment, the information that gushed in directly in such a short period of time was an extremely shocking pressure for the teleportation tree door. It instantly felt an indescribable impact on its entire mind, and it faintly felt like its entire body was about to completely collapse and be destroyed. Fortunately, it was not an ordinary creature after all. It was a powerful existence that was integrated with the entire dojo, and the entire dojo was helping it withstand the impact at this time. Therefore, an invisible force protected its mind the moment it was about to collapse, allowing it to recover completely. The process repeated many times. Time passed unknowingly. After an unknown period of time, when the teleportation tree door came back to its senses, it realized that it had completely understood every process of repairing the more than 30,000 spacetimes. There was no change in the nomological rules or any change in the spacetimes at all. I see. Although it was very difficult for the teleportation tree door to receive the information, it was still very happy at this time. An inexplicable smile appeared on its face. Although the previous few processes of repairing the world were not very difficult for it, and Luo Fan had directly shown it in great detail, there was still a layer of separation after all. When it remembered the repair method, it was difficult to grasp the entire process as a whole. At this moment, the situation was completely different. Luo Fan poured all the information into the teleportation tree door's mind, allowing it to completely skip the process of memorizing it and directly grasp all the changes. This allowed it to not be disturbed by all distracting thoughts and directly grasp the entire repair process as a whole, allowing it to have a deeper understanding of the entire repair process than before. How to do it? Why do it this way? What special effects would there be by doing this? These kinds of things were no longer a blur to him. There would be a difference. For him, it was as if the fog in front of him had been completely lifted. The feeling was obviously completely different from before. With a slight thought, he knew that it had been 10 days and 10 nights since he received the information. For a moment, he was very satisfied with this efficiency. He looked around and found that Luo Fan was floating in the air not far away. There were all kinds of inexplicable auras surging on his body. When he looked over, Luo Fan seemed to have sensed it. He turned his head and smiled, saying, "Fellow cultivator, you're awake? Were there any omissions in the information just now?" "Thank you, fellow Taoist. The information is flawless and perfect enough to guide me through the entire repair process." The teleportation tree gate smiled and bowed to Luo Fan. Hearing this, Luo Fan nodded and said, "If that's the case, fellow Taoist can go. However, I can't wait to start comprehending Senior Divine Prince's comprehension and Jingyan." When the teleportation tree gate heard this, it couldn't help but smile. It understood Luo Fan's mentality very well. If he was Luo Fan, he might be even more anxious than him. As such, he only bowed once before turning around and taking a step forward. He chose a space-time curtain that could give him the most merit, which was also the one that needed to be repaired the most. In the blink of an eye, he arrived before the curtain of light and sent out his power to repair the space-time behind the curtain of light. Seeing this, Luo Fan smiled slightly. He raised his hand and took out the crystal from his sleeve. At this moment, far away in Tian Hunzi's dojo, Luo Fan's main body, which was on a certain continent, slightly moved. He woke up from a state of deep thought and open his eyes. His right hand spread out in front of him, and an inexplicable power condensed in his right hand out of thin air. These waves of energy were very strange. They were like waves of information, and the Weiji on his right hand was like a black hole that could never be filled. No matter how much energy was poured into it, there was no sign of it being satisfied. Luo Fan tightly stared at the black hole-like existence in his palm. There seemed to be countless characters, patterns, and shadows flashing crazily in his eyes. Faintly, there seemed to be countless mysterious brilliance of wisdom constantly lighting up and extinguishing. The comprehension and jingyan of a cultivator who has set foot on the 9th step is indeed mysterious. Even if I want to replicate it, the difficulty is still quite shocking. Looks like I'll still need a few more years to complete the entire replication process. Luo Fan thought to himself with an inexplicable smile on his face. The more mysterious the comprehension and jingyan was, the more difficult it would be to replicate it, which meant that the benefits he would gain from it would be greater. Under such circumstances, he felt that the difficulty was beyond his imagination. How could he not feel happy about it? That's right. What Luo Fan was doing at this moment was the comprehension and jingyan of the Divine Sun that his projection avatar was holding in the dojo of the Divine Sun clone. These comprehension and jingyan were extremely precious and mysterious. Although his projection avatar was also him, there was no difference between his will, memory, and knowledge from his original body. However, there was still a huge difference in the level of power. Some things in cultivation could only be comprehended when one's power had reached a certain level. If he were to use his projection avatar to comprehend those mysteries, it would be many times worse than if he were to comprehend them with his main body. The amount of time he would need to spend would also be many times longer. This was obviously not an efficient method. Therefore, Luo Fan used the connection between his projection avatar and his original body. Tong Guo's projection doppelganger was able to sense the translucent crystal. He continuously received the information from it and transferred it to his main body. Then, with the help of his power, he gathered the information in one place and completely recreated the translucent crystal. As for why he condensed the crystal again, he didn't directly place it in his mind and let him comprehend it directly. It was because he wanted to restore the mysteries inside the crystal-clear crystal as much as possible so that there wouldn't be any loopholes due to breaking up its structure. Anyway, condensing the information into a crystal and placing it directly in his mind was just a matter of changing hands. To him, it was just a matter of changing hands. It wouldn't be a problem at all. In the dojo of the Divine Sun, the eyes of Luo Fan's projection avatar emitted a strange brilliance and pierced directly into the crystal-clear crystal. As the brilliance pierced into the crystal, it emitted an inexplicable light. There seemed to be countless mysterious lights and shadows constantly flashing in it, and in his eyes. At the same time, there were countless mysterious and complicated lights and shadows constantly changing. It was as if they were constantly being copied from the crystal-clear crystal. In the distance, the teleportation tree door shone brightly, and the light and shadow inside the light curtain in front of him flowed. Countless threads intertwined and changed, producing all kinds of incredible changes and showing all kinds of complex and unimaginable changes. Just like that, the entire tree-shaped space became silent, and not a single sound could be heard coming from it. Just like that, time passed slowly. In less than 20 days or a month, the space shone brightly and endless public merits condensed. However, every time, the teleportation tree door wrapped in merit would sigh with regret and turn to another light curtain with some dissatisfaction. Then it would start a new round of changes. And so on, it repeated many times. Obviously, although he could obtain a huge amount of merit every 20 days or a month, each time, the merit would only push him a little in the direction of transcending the shackles. Every time, he felt that he only needed a little more merit to completely transcend the shackles and obtain true freedom. However, in the end, the result would always disappoint him. Even if it was 10 times, 20 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, he sensed that the merit he had obtained had already reached an unimaginable level. The wheel of merit behind his head had already condensed into a solid form, and its size had already expanded to several thousand feet in diameter. However, it was still unable to allow him to transcend the shackles of his body and allow his spiritual sense to truly turn the false into the real and condense it into a real one. If it weren't for the fact that there were still more than 20 to 30,000 merit points, he might have already gone mad with irritation. The teleportation tree door asked itself again and again, and there were even many times when it almost couldn't help but wake up Luo Fan and ask, "Why is it so difficult for me to transcend the shackles?" This amount of merit is enough for the consciousness of millions of space-time to transcend the shackles of all living beings. So why isn't it enough for me? Is it because this method can only be infinitely close to success? Fortunately, he was still rational. He knew that even if he asked Luo Fan, it would be useless. There would be no result. In the end, he resisted the idea of disturbing Luo Fan. Under such circumstances, several years passed in the blink of an eye. On this day, the body of Luo Fan, who was in the dojo of Tian Hun, suddenly trembled, and the fluctuating light in his eyes suddenly disappeared. The power that was continuously gathering in his right hand also stopped completely in an instant. And on top of his originally empty palm, there was now an irregular, sparkling, and translucent crystal. This crystal was almost the same as the one in the hands of his clone projection in the dojo of God T. There was no difference at all, but he had finally completely replicated this crystal after spending several years. Looking at this crystal, an inexplicable smile appeared on Luo Fan's face. "It's finally done," he thought to himself, and let out a long breath. After completing the entire replication process, he felt a little relieved. He no longer needed to worry about what would happen to the clone projection in the dojo of God T, nor did he need to worry about when the clone projection would leave the dojo. This was clearly a change that made him feel relieved. Just as he heaved a sigh of relief, he suddenly had a thought. He raised his head and looked toward the southeast. His eyes pierced through the mountain walls and the barrier of the distant void, and he saw a Weiji that was countless miles away from him. There, his divine soul avatar was floating in the air. Around the divine soul clone, there were dozens of cultivators who were roughly equivalent to the level 9 of the mortal realm, and they were all filled with killing intent. The mental state of these cultivators was at least at the level of the individual immortal realm, and there was even an old man whose mental state had reached the perfected immortal realm. Although he had just broken through, he was already at the perfected immortal realm. So he was dozens or even hundreds of times stronger than those cultivators whose mental states were only at the level of the individual immortal realm. "You're Chin Fan, right? I heard that you have an immortal master. Why don't you come out now? Let's see what that immortal master looks like, and if he's really that powerful." The old man looked at Luo Fan's divine soul clone. He said lightly, "At this moment, there was a huge, solid merit light wheel behind the head of Luo Fan's divine soul clone. This merit light wheel was exactly the same as his projection clone in the dojo of God T. This was natural. Merit existed according to one's will, and as long as one had the same will, the merit would be the same. Even if they were 2 dojos apart, it was the same, if Luo Fan's main body was willing to. At this moment, even a merit light wheel like this could appear behind his head. It was just that it was meaningless to him, so he didn't want to take it. The merit contained in this merit light wheel was so powerful that it had completely repaid the karma between him and the world. At this moment, there was a strange aura around Luo Fan's divine soul clone. It was surrounded by an indescribable aura, and it gave off a sense of transcendence. It was as if it could break through the shackles of the world at any moment and reach an unimaginable place that was beyond the heavens and earth. The reason for this was that after he finished the karma with the world, the gate of ascension that he saw was extremely obvious and real. It felt like he was already standing at the door, and he could push it open with a little force. The various auras that appeared on his body and surrounded him appeared because of this. These auras were said to be his aura, but they were actually the aura of the Gate of Ascension. In the few years that Luo Fan had been replicating the god T, the situation on this continent had been turbulent and unpredictable. The Great Civilization Calamity had erupted a few years ago. The entire continent was filled with a faint evil aura, and all methods of deduction were completely ineffective. The various karma of the past erupted at the same time at this moment, as if it had been prearranged. For a moment, years of hatred, years of kindness, and the various backup plans that many living beings had left behind millions of years ago erupted in the past few years. Due to these changes, the entire continent became extremely chaotic. This kind of chaos even made people feel that the previous peace and tranquility was just an illusion. There were killings and battles everywhere. The atmosphere of the entire continent had become one where the strong preyed on the weak. Everyone had to worry about being killed and robbed at all times, even if they obtained some benefits. This kind of chaos not only affected the cultivation world, but it also affected the secular world. The various clans in the mortal world were also embroiled in countless conflicts. Blood and fire were being spilled all over the continent. Luo Fan's divine soul clone had joined the Qian family. His name in the Qian family was Qian Fan. The reason why he was being stopped now was not complicated. It was because the gold and the treasure he had left in the Qian family had become known, attracting the greed of countless living beings. Now, more than half of the entire Qian family had been killed, and the remaining half, including Qian Tong and his wife, had entered the treasure he had left behind. At this time, he was carrying it with him, quietly lying in his sleeve. The people who were now besieging him were the elders of the second-ranked Divine Demon Sect, one of the top 3 sects on this continent. The Divine Demon Sect was extremely powerful, at least dozens of times stronger than the Taishan sect. The entire sect had hundreds of elders at the 9th level of the mortal realm, and many of them had reached the true immortal realm. It was not too exaggerated to split out dozens of divine soul clones to chase after Luo Fan. After all, behind Luo Fan stood an immortal who had returned after ascending. The reason why these people did not attack was because they were guarding against the immortal that Luo Fan had fabricated. Otherwise, why would they be so vigilant when there were so many of them and Luo Fan was only a 20-year-old kid? Originally, I didn't care about the calamity of civilization. I just never thought that the thing I left behind would bring about such an outcome for the Qian family, causing the karma between me and the Qian family to deepen. Instead, it's preventing me from ascending, Luo Fan said helplessly as he stood there. Several years ago, when his projection clone blocked the portal of time and space between the dojos of the heavenly soul and the dojos of the divine body, he eliminated the endless negative karma in the valley and obtained enough merit to end all the karma between him and the world. However, after that, because he had not ended his karma with the Qian family, he was unable to open the Gate of Ascension and see the secrets hidden in the dojo of the Tianhuns. This made him feel rather helpless, but there was nothing he could do. He could only continue walking on this continent and search for opportunities to end his karma. However, he did not think that a few days ago he would suddenly sense that the Qian family was in trouble. When he returned, he found that the pebble he had left behind was floating above the Qian family. The entire Qian family had been turned into ruins, and the smell of blood filled the air. Seeing this, Luo Fan was naturally furious. He casually killed the many cultivators besieging the Qian family. As soon as he sensed the scene inside the cobblestone, a teleportation force appeared around him, wanting to teleport him to another place. Chapter 1079. Luo Fan could not be bothered to be courteous with the elders of the Divine Demon Sect. With a thought, he raised his hand and pointed forward. In an instant, countless mysterious and strange threads appeared out of thin air and condensed into the shape of a huge axe. When the axe was first condensed, its aura was very weak. However, it was rapidly absorbing the vitality in the surroundings, allowing the axe to grow and solidify at an astonishing rate. The aura it gave off became more and more powerful and terrifying. It even made the elders of the divine demon gate in the surroundings feel an indescribable pressure. It was as if they could be chopped into pieces by the terrifying axe in the next moment. At that moment, the divine demon sex perfected immortal realm elder, who was also the most powerful elder present, shouted, "We can't wait any longer. We have to take action immediately." As he shouted, the dozens of elders of the divine demon sect let out soft shouts, and countless threads appeared around them at the same time. These threads intertwined with each other and formed a huge array formation. It completely enveloped the void within a range of several 100,000 feet, forming an extremely complicated three-dimensional network that enveloped Luo Fan from all directions. Following that, these threads frantically absorbed the essence energy. The endless origin energy in the surroundings seemed to be attracted by a black hole and was crazily thrown into this network. Even the speed at which Luo Fan condensed the origin energy was a bit slower than the speed at which the huge three-dimensional network was pulled. As more and more essence energy was poured in the area in the middle of the huge network, suddenly a faint gray fog appeared. This gray fog was extremely strange. It seemed to have the effect of isolating everything. It even made Luo Fan feel that his vision of the outside world and his perception of the outside world were affected and shielded. Faintly, he felt that the outside world was hazy and blurry. Could this be the divine demon sect's special ability? Luo Fan looked at the surrounding array formation, and his eyes shone brightly. This kind of situation was something he had never seen before. The power of the array formation vaguely communicated with the origin of this piece of land. After the array formation took shape, it drew in the power of the entire continent and gathered it together, transforming it into this gray and hazy appearance. Luo Fan carefully sensed the mysteries of this array. After a while, finally, he felt like he had exhausted the mysteries of this formation. In a trance, he found that the gate of ascension in his mind seemed to have become lighter. It was as if the difficulty of pushing it had decreased a little. I see. This is a way to intercept the authority of this continent, and the structure of it is similar to the structure of this continent, Luo Fan thought. He slowed down the speed at which he condensed his axe. At this moment, heaven and earth shook. A huge figure condensed in the gray mist. This humanoid figure was tens of thousands of feet tall, and it almost filled the entire area shrouded in gray mist. In front of this figure, Luo Fan's figure was simply like an ant, more than 10,000 times weaker. After the figure condensed, it roared into the sky. A sacred and terrifying aura was released from its body. This aura soared into the sky and shrouded in all directions, making all living beings within the range of this aura feel like the entire world was suppressing and rejecting it. Its roar was filled with an indescribable vastness and loneliness, as if it was a roar that came from the ancient times before the world was created. This figure was like a god, like a demon, and one could tell at a glance that it was thousands of times stronger than an ordinary person. Luo Fan looked at the living being in front of him, and an inexplicable joy appeared on his face. Within the godlike aura of this figure, there was an aura that Luo Fan was extremely familiar with. It was the aura that came from the gate of ascension, an aura that was far from what this piece of land should have. Luo Fan had wasted over 20 years on this continent. Wasn't it all for the sake of entering the gate of ascension and seeing what secrets were hidden behind this Tao sanctum? What he saw before him clearly had a special relationship with the world after ascension, and it was even possible that it was a projection of the world after ascension. How could he not be surprised? All right, let me see what exactly you are. Luo Fan yelled and no longer hesitated. He controlled the axe that he had condensed and charged at the figure. The power of the axe was extremely terrifying, as it sliced through the power of the formation in midair and completely sliced through the gray mist in the surroundings. As the axe passed, it left behind a long trace that seemed like a vacuum without any gray mist. The speed of the axe was extremely fast, and in the blink of an eye, it had arrived before the godlike figure and was about to slash into its chest. At this moment, the figure stopped roaring and suddenly raised his hand to slap at the axe. His speed was not very fast, but he seemed to have received some kind of strange boost from this continent. It was as if he had traveled through time and space. Before the axe was about to come into contact with his body, he slapped the axe, causing it to change its direction and charge over his shoulder. It once again slashed through more of the gray fog, leaving behind even more traces of what seemed to be a vacuum in this formation. Faced with such a change, Luo Fan's eyes narrowed. The strength of this figure was much stronger than he had imagined. The slap just now seemed simple, but in fact, if one did not have the strength beyond the mortal realm and the control of the realm beyond the mortal realm, it was absolutely impossible to achieve that. Obviously, the power of this figure had broken through the limit of this piece of land. It had broken through the limit of this piece of land that even Luo Fan could not raise his strength beyond the limit of the mortal realm. It had displayed the strength beyond the mortal realm and even reached the golden immortal realm. How is this possible? Even I can't break through the limit. How can this thing break through the limit? Could it be that the essence of this thing has already surpassed my body? Such an incredible thought flashed in Luo Fan's mind. With a slight thought, the axe that had slashed over the figure turned in the void. It slashed at the figure's back at a faster speed than before. The figure turned around and opened his hand to grab the axe. It was still not very fast, but it still easily touched the axe and directly grasped it in his hand. Although the axe condensed by Luo Fan was huge, it was only the size of a normal person. Compared to this giant that was tens of thousands of meters tall, it was still not big enough. Being held in his hand, it was like a tall and strong man holding an embroidery needle. No matter how one looked at it, it was very awkward. No matter how one looked at it, it did not match. After the big man held the axe, he roared. With a loud roar, he suddenly clenched his fist, and a terrifying force directly poured into the axe, causing it to disintegrate. The axe completely collapsed. It turned into countless threads and pneuma. It dispersed in all directions and was absorbed by the formation set up by dozens of elders of the divine demon sect, causing the surrounding gray fog to become thicker. This made Luo Fan's vision and perception of the outside world even stronger. Qian Fan, you can't win. This formation is the divine formation of our divine demon sect. It can condense the will left in the world by the creation divine demon. No matter how strong you are just an ant to the creation divine demon. Obediently hand over the cave magic treasure, or the full power of the formation will erupt, and you will be turned into ashes in an instant. Don't make a mistake. The voice of the elder, who was in the perfected immortal realm, reverberated throughout the whole formation. This voice kept reverberating throughout the formation, giving people the feeling that the whole world was speaking. This feeling was obviously not good. Creation divine demon. Luo Fan's eyes lit up when he heard this name. Any world, as long as it had intelligent creatures and developed a civilization, would definitely trace the origin of the world. Naturally, there would be all kinds of creation legends passed down. It was the same even if this continent was in a dojo. To the living beings on this continent was their entire world. Therefore, the existence that created this continent was the creation fiend god that split the heavens and earth apart. This was common sense for all creatures on this continent, but it had another meaning for Luo Fan. This is clearly Tian Hunzi's dojo. If there is a divine demon that created everything in this world, it can only be the Saint Grand Tao ancestor and Tian Hunzi. Among them, the Saint Grand Tao ancestor merely opened up the world in this dojo. When the entire world was handed over to Tian Hunzi, it was still empty. There was no substance or even any power. The one that truly made so many continents appear in this dojo, so much strange energy, and so many strange laws appear was Tian Hunzi. Therefore, if this divine demon is really condensed from the will left behind by some existence in this world, it can only be condensed from Tian Hunzi's will. Various thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind, and the light in his eyes became even more dazzling. With this guess in mind, Luo Fan stopped his previous plan. With a slight thought, countless threads appeared around him and wrapped around his body. In an instant, he arrived before the head of the 10,000-meter-tall divine demon. Two strange lights shot out of his eyes and directly shot into the eyes of the divine demon. The divine demon had the appearance of a burly man. Although it was 10,000 meters tall, it did not have any special characteristics that made it different from mortals. It was completely like someone with a natural Tao aptitude. Its face was cold, and its eyes were empty. Only an unyielding light would occasionally flash in the depths of its eyes, but it would only flash for a moment. His roars, his fighting style, and his movements were all instincts that came from his body under the stimulation of the formation. When the elders of the divine demon sect in the formation saw Luo Fan's actions, an inexplicable sense of unease surged in their hearts for some reason. Feeling uneasy, they urged the power of the formation even more ferociously, controlling the fiend god to raise its hand and grab at Luo Fan. At the same time, they made the fiend god open its mouth and spit out a mouthful of pure blood energy, which rushed towards Luo Fan. This blood energy was extremely masculine, and it could cause indescribable harm to all spirits on this continent. If ordinary living beings were to be touched by this blood energy, even if they were at the 9th tier of the mortal realm and had a mental state as strong as a gold immortal, they wouldn't be able to withstand it. They would be completely melted by this blood energy. However, Luo Fan was clearly not an ordinary cultivator on this continent. Facing this blood chi, with just a thought, he raised his hand and waved it lightly. Countless strange threads appeared around him and directly fused with the blood chi. Then, he suddenly controlled the blood chi to change in a very strange way. This way of changing seemed to be extremely chaotic. It was as if there was no connection between the threads, as if they were placed randomly. However, it was this process that caused a large hand to appear out of thin air above the blood chi, directly blocking the huge hand that the fiend god had slapped towards Luo Fan. The collision between the two produced a loud rumble. However, the fiend god's efforts were in vain. Luo Fan didn't even move his body half a step before he blocked the attack of the huge hand. How can this be? The elders of the divine demon sect who had set up the formation roared in disbelief. What was happening in front of them was completely beyond their understanding. The pure blood aura spat out by the creation godfiends had always been the trump card of the godfiend sect. It didn't matter how strong they were. It didn't matter if they were strong enough to destroy the entire void. It didn't matter if they could make the entire divine demon sect disappear from this world by themselves. Even if they could fight the fiend god to a draw, once they were enveloped by this blood chi, there would be no chance of survival. No matter how strong they would only be able to last a little longer in this blood chi. However, what was happening in front of them at this moment? The blood chi couldn't hurt Qian Fan at all. Instead, it was controlled by Qian Fan and used to block another attack of the fiend god. This was simply subverting their worldview. How could they remain calm when facing this? They were already very strong-willed to not immediately lose control of their power and kill themselves because they were too shocked. At this moment, Luo Fan didn't care about how shocked the elders of the divine demon sect were. The divine light in his eyes directly rushed into the eyes of the fiend god. Through the connection between the eyes and the soul, he directly came into contact with the depths of the fiend god's soul. It was an empty and broken world. This world was vast and boundless. There was no vital energy or substance within it. There was only sorrow, desolation, unwillingness, and despair. All sorts of intense emotions surged in this empty and broken world, causing all sorts of inexplicable fluctuations to appear from time to time. These fluctuations were like ripples on the surface of a calm lake. From time to time, some things in the depths of the lake would be stirred up to the surface of the lake, causing some inexplicable lights and shadows to occasionally flash in this empty and broken world. These lights and shadows were extremely short, extremely chaotic, and extremely broken. Even with Luo Fan's perception ability, it was difficult for him to clearly sense what these lights and shadows were showing or expressing. He could only sense that these lights and shadows didn't contain the scene of this continent, but something else, a broader and more exciting world. It really is Tian Hunzi. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh when he sensed all these things. If this fiend god was just a force, his spiritual world wouldn't look like this. The spiritual world in front of him could only mean one thing, and that was that this fiend god was indeed condensed from the remnant will of a powerful living being that had died and disappeared. In this continent, there could only be one person who could see the remnant will of a living being that didn't belong to this continent or this place, Tian Hunzi. Hence, Luo Fan could confirm that this fiend god was Tian Hunzi. It's a pity that the remnant will here is too little. The Tian Hunzi that is condensed is far inferior to the real him. It might not even be 1 in 100 million. It's impossible to see Tian Hunzi through this fiend god, Luo Fan thought helplessly. However, although Luo Fan was a little disappointed at this time, he was more satisfied. After all, the fiend god sex method had opened up a whole new world for him and allowed him to find out that there was such a way to see Tian Hunzi. Even if he could only see the remnant will of Tian Hunzi, it was still an extremely rare thing. Due to the limitations of the fiend god sex cultivation base, the array formation of the fiend god sect can only be used on this continent. If I can modify it and use my body to activate it, it will be a simple matter to spread it to every inch of space on every continent in the dojo. In that case, how much of Tian Hunzi will I be able to condense? Luo Fan thought to himself as he began to look forward to it. In fact, this method of condensing the remnant will of the owner of the dojo through the array formation and recreating the owner of the dojo couldn't be used in every abandoned dojo. For this method to work, there had to be a major prerequisite. That was, the owner of the dojo had to have died in the dojo. Only then would his will remain in the dojo, and there would be a possibility of it being condensed again. If the owner of the dojo had died in the outside world, this method would not have any effect. If the owner didn't die in the dojo, how could the scattered will exist in the dojo? How could it be condensed there? Generally speaking, this method of death was more common. Tian Hunzi's method of death was extremely rare. Chapter 1080. Various thoughts flashed through Luo Fan's mind. He had already decided to see if he could condense the remnant will of some powerful cultivators after returning to Earth. However, this decision was only made secretly in his heart. At this moment, he naturally couldn't do it directly. At this moment, he was still fighting with the many elders of the divine demon sect. Since he already understood the true meaning of this formation, it naturally did not pose much of a threat to him. With a thought, the blood essence that the creation god fiend spat out was under his control, and with a jolt, it shot straight up into the air. In the process of charging out, the vital energy and blood constantly twisted and condensed in the void. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a bolt of lightning that was as red as a piece of red jade. It circled around a mysterious trajectory and directly pierced into the void. In that instant, every single elder of the divine demon sect let out a shocking scream at the same time. Every single one of them was bleeding from their 7 orifices in an instant. Their entire bodies withered, and the power in their bodies completely collapsed in an instant. Countless amounts of power dissipated from their bodies, merging into the void and eventually disappearing without a trace. After losing their strength, they couldn't even maintain their state of floating in the air. Like dumplings being thrown into a pot, they plummeted straight down. Without the person who set up the formation was like water without a source. The gray mist became thinner and soon disappeared without a trace, revealing the scene before the formation was set up. The divine demon that was condensed in front of Luo Fan also became more and more blurry during the process. When all the mist disappeared, there was a loud rumble. The creation god fiend exploded, and his figure instantly disappeared without a trace. It was as if it had never appeared. It's a pity that it's less than 1 in 100 million of Tian Hunzi's will. If it could reach 1 in 10,000, perhaps it would be able to exist for a long time, and there would be no need to rely on the formation. Luo Fan sighed. When he saw this, he sighed inwardly. If the remnant of Tian Hunzi's will formed by the creation fiend god was more than 1/10,000th of it, then the remnant will itself would possess all sorts of unimaginable powers. It would form a unified force that could resist the effects of the collapse and preserve it for a long time. In that case, although it was still not Tian Hun's body and could not revive Tian Hun's body, it could be used as the main body of Tian Hun's will. It could use this body to borrow the faint connection between Tian Hun's will and condense all of it into this body. This allowed this body to gather all the wills of Tian Hun's children. Tian Hunzi's body and memories reappeared. In other words, if the creation god fiend contained more than 1/10,000th of Tian Hunzi's will, it could be used as the main body of the Great Wall's will. It would be much easier to use it to set up formations, and the effect would be much stronger. That was why Luo Fan felt that it was a pity. He thought to himself. Luo Fan turned his head and looked down at the place where the elders of the divine demon sect had fallen. After all, these elders were the upper echelons of the divine demon sect, and the techniques they cultivated had an extremely strong body-tempering effect. Although they had fallen to the ground like rocks because they had lost their strength, the most heavily injured, one of them only had a broken leg, and none of them had died because of this. The elder with the true immortal realm was not injured at all. He had even faintly condensed some power, which was much better than the others. The means of an immortal. It really is unbelievable. The elder looked up at Luo Fan with an indescribable sorrow in his eyes as he murmured, "The means of an immortal? You can take it as such," Luo Fan said calmly. With that, he could not be bothered to waste any more time talking to them. He waved his right hand in that direction. In an instant, thousands of strands of sword chi shot out in front of him. They were densely packed and covered the sky as they shot towards the place where the elders of the divine demon sect had fallen. Each of these strands of sword chi was extremely condensed. They were like divine weapons that could easily destroy ordinary magic treasures. Not to mention the fact that the elders of the divine demon sect had completely lost their power. Even if they were at their peak and had full power, they would only be able to block the thousands of strands of sword chi for a while. Just like that, the thousands of strands of sword chi covered everything within a radius of hundreds of feet around the elders without any obstruction. In an instant, sizzling sounds rang out as the elders let out miserable cries and grunts. All of the elders were instantly minced into pieces. Even the ground where they were standing had a huge pit with a radius of hundreds of feet. The moment the elders died, Luo Fan suddenly felt that the gate of ascension that he had seen in his mind seemed to show signs of opening. Sensing this, Luo Fan understood what was going on. This was clearly the moment he completely destroyed the elders of the divine demon sect. He had already understood most of the karma between the Qian family and Qian Tong and his wife. He was almost about to end his mortal karma and open the gate of ascension. Of course, it was only almost. The reason why the Qian family suffered calamity was because of the heavenly cave treasure given to them by Luo Fan. The real culprit was the divine demon sect. The elders who had just been killed by Luo Fan were only the ones who directly acted. The real mastermind had not yet been eliminated. In this way, of course, the karma between the Qian family and Qian Tong and his wife couldn't be considered to have been completely resolved. With a thought, Luo Fan's soul avatar stepped into the space inside the cobblestone. At this time, the entire place was filled with sorrow. Everyone in the Qian clan was very sad and full of hatred. The entire space was filled with an inexplicable sadness. Luo Fan was already aware of this. After stepping into this space, he directly appeared in front of Qian Tong and Mother Qian, bowed to them, and told them what he had done before. When Qian Tong and his wife saw Luo Fan, they were both pleasantly surprised and worried. They were pleasantly surprised to see their son, but they were also worried about why Luo Fan would appear here, whether he had encountered an accident or whether he had paid a price. After listening to Luo Fan's explanation of the matter, they couldn't help but be surprised, and then they were overjoyed. This kind of joy, in addition to a small part because the hatred of the Qian family had been avenged, was more because they saw that Luo Fan had become so strong that he could easily defeat dozens of elders of the Divine Demon sect, the second largest sect in the world. This kind of incredible achievement, they didn't even dare to dream about it. My son, it's good that you're here now. Now that the great calamity has broken out in the outside world, why don't you stay in this heavenly cave with us and wait for the great calamity to pass before making any plans? Mother Qian didn't have much scruples and directly said to Luo Fan. Although Qian Tong didn't say anything, his expression was also in agreement. When Luo Fan heard this, he shook his head and said, I hope Lord Father and Lord Mother will forgive me for being unfilial and not being able to stay in the heavenly cave to cross the great calamity with you two. Why is that? Mother Qian was shocked and quickly asked. I've been cultivating with Master these years, and thanks to Master's help, I have broken through again and again. Now that I have sensed the existence of the Gate of Ascension, I only need to wait for the opportunity to ascend to the immortal world. If I stay in the heavenly cave and miss the opportunity to ascend, it's not a big deal, but Master wants to use me to ascend to the immortal world. If I can't ascend, I'm afraid it will delay Master's important matter. Luo Fan said, What? My son has already sensed the Gate of Ascension. At this time, Qian Tong could no longer maintain his original dignified appearance and exclaimed, Yes. Luo Fan naturally nodded. Good, good, good. Qian Tong was overjoyed and repeatedly applauded. Since ancient times, there have been countless cultivators, but those who can sense the Gate of Ascension and have the hope to ascend are very rare. Now that my son has this opportunity, the heavens really bless my son. At this time, Mother Qian's face was a little surprised, but also a little reluctant. It seemed quite complicated. I will make the decision on this matter. My son must not stay in the heavenly cave. This rare opportunity to ascend must be grasped tightly. Ascending to the immortal world means immortality, and from then on, he will no longer be the same as mortals. But you can't give up because of family ties. Qian Tong said directly. Mother Qian also nodded and said, My son can rest assured, your father and I are both healthy. With this heavenly cave, you can safely survive the great calamity. You don't have to worry about us. Just go and pursue your own immortality. Moreover, your master has been very kind to you. Since he wants to borrow the power of your ascension to return to the immortal world, you must do your best to help him. When Luo Fan heard their words, he couldn't help but feel a little emotional. He had already expected this kind of thing, but when he really heard that the two of them did not hesitate to let him leave them to pursue ascension, he still felt a little emotional. Father, Mother, rest assured, this matter is not urgent. Maybe I can ask Master if he can bring the heavenly cave with him to the immortal world. In that case, we don't need to be separated. Luo Fan said. When Mother Qian heard this, her eyes lit up. As parents, how could they really be willing to be separated from their children? For the sake of their children's future, they might let go. But if they could have the best of both worlds, not delaying their children's future and being able to be with their children, of course it couldn't be better. My son, quickly ask your master. Mother Qian said quickly. Luo Fan nodded, bowed to the two of them, then left the heavenly cave and returned to the outside world. He held the pebble in his hand and looked up at the west of the continent. Divine Demon sect? Let me see how powerful the second-ranked sect in the whole continent is. With this thought, he put the pebble into his sleeve, raised his hand, and countless silk threads appeared out of thin air around him, wrapped his body, and turned into a long rainbow flying to the west. Luo Fan's own realm was at the terrifying level of the Tao Master Realm. Even if this continent restricted all the power beyond the mortal realm, he could still exert unimaginable divine sense. This kind of means of flying with the help of power was not difficult for him at all. This kind of flying speed was also fast beyond imagination. This process lasted for 3 days. During the whole process, the distance that Luo Fan flew was calculated in the hundreds of millions of miles. By the time Luo Fan stopped his escape light and his figure appeared, he was already over a mountain range. This was where the mountain gate of the divine demon sect was located. The concentration of the vitality in the whole mountain range was 100 times higher than that of the outside world, and it was also filled with a very powerful aura compared to the continent. There was even a faint charm of the creation divine demon exuding from the whole mountain range. Luo Fan looked down at the mountain gate of the divine demon sect with burning eyes, and in an instant, he saw many secrets of the entire mountain gate. The whole mountain range was actually a huge formation. This formation was the same as the one displayed by the elders of the divine demon sect, but it was more vast and more complicated than that one. It seemed. The battle array displayed by the elders of the divine demon sect was only a small part of this huge battle array. In this formation, Tian Hunzi's chi, blood, and willpower were condensed, constantly refining the mountain, changing the nature of the vitality in the mountain range, and changing the nature of the mountain. This made the nature of the vitality in the mountain range several times higher than that of the outside world. If one cultivated here, it would be more than 10 times faster than the outside world. Because of the changes in the vitality, one's body would be refined again and again in the process of cultivation, and thus become stronger and more amazing. What a good divine demon sect. It's actually not to occupy a famous mountain or treasure land. Instead, it's to create a famous mountain or treasure land. If it wasn't for the fact that I have to get rid of you, because I have to get rid of you, I'm afraid I wouldn't have the heart to do it. Luo Fan looked at the mountain range and could not help but sigh. The divine demon sect's ability to change the world and stand proud and independent was something that Luo Fan admired. If there were no conflicts of interest, he would be quite willing to see how far the divine demon sect could develop in the future. At this moment, an incomparably powerful force rushed out of the mountain range and rushed straight towards Luo Fan. This force was very familiar to Luo Fan. It was the power of the creation divine demon Tian Hunzi that he had encountered 3 days ago. However, it was slightly different from that aura. It seemed to be more condensed and more agile. Where did this loose, fiendish demon come from? How dare you spy on my divine demon sect? A cold shout rushed out of the force, and an insufferably arrogant aura rushed towards Lu Shang. This is a method that refines the power of the array to the point of perfection, and then turns it into an external incarnation. Luo Fan instantly knew the true appearance of this aura, and for a moment he frowned slightly. This method seemed to have only appeared in the past few years, and it contained a kind of inexperience. Although the method was mysterious, it had not been fully unleashed. This method doesn't seem to be a method that the divine demon sect itself has. Could it be that because of the great civilization calamity, the divine demon sect has obtained some fortuitous encounters? Did someone teach this method to the divine demon sect? Luo Fan thought to himself, and suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. The force stopped in front of Luo Fan and directly condensed into the figure of a middle-aged man. This middle-aged man had a dignified face, and he had a superior aura around him that seemed to be in control of everything. At a glance, it was obvious that this person must have been in a high position for a long time, and his power should have been very limited. In the entire divine demon sect, perhaps only the sect master of the divine demon sect could have such a special characteristic. Are you the sect master of the divine demon sect? Luo Fan asked lightly. After the middle-aged man condensed, he originally planned to teach Luo Fan a lesson, but he changed his mind the moment he saw Luo Fan. This was because he found that he could not see through the person in front of him. The person in front of him looked like the most ordinary person, but he could directly float in the air, which was definitely not something that an ordinary person could do. This made him unable to figure out how strong Luo Fan was, and he began to doubt whether his external incarnation could defeat Luo Fan. Because of this, in the face of Luo Fan's impolite questioning, although he was furious, he did not immediately flare up. Instead, he said in a calm tone, "I am the sect master of the divine demon sect. Fellow Taoist, how should I address you? Why have you come to the divine demon sect? Please tell me." Although his tone was calm, his eyes narrowed slightly, and a dignified aura shot into the sky. Under this dignified aura, it made it seem like a high and mighty emperor was questioning his subjects. Luo Fan frowned slightly. With his status, the sect master of the divine demon sect's actions were clearly a great offense, and it made Luo Fan very unhappy. Feeling unhappy, Luo Fan could not be bothered to think about anything else. He said indifferently, "I have a name here, and it's called Qian Fan. I don't think you need me to tell you why I'm here." As he spoke, he could not be bothered to listen to the sect master of the divine demon sect's reply. He raised his hand and pointed. In an instant, countless threads appeared around the sect master of the divine demon sect's external incarnation. They suddenly condensed and closed inwards. In an instant, the external incarnation of the divine demon sect's sect master was cut into countless tiny fragments. Then he raised his hand and slapped out. The fragments instantly scattered, turning into countless tiny fragments of power in the blink of an eye. They were absorbed by the entire mountain range below, and they disappeared in front of Luo Fan. They sank down and returned to the mountain range's array. At this moment, a terrifying aura rushed out of the mountain range and turned into a huge smoke signal that rose into the sky. "How dare you!" A cold shout filled with endless anger came from the mountain range. Although the shout was not very loud, the entire mountain range shook violently. It was as if the entire mountain range could not withstand his anger. This voice was the voice of the sect master of the divine demon sect. However, compared to the voice of the external incarnation that had condensed in front of Luo Fan, it was even more dignified and deep. At the same time, the deterrent force was even more terrifying. Chapter 1081. Naturally, it was impossible for the divine demon sect's sect master to mobilize the dozens of elders of the divine demon sect. After all, this was a force that could destroy a large sect. Even if the divine demon sect had hundreds of powerful elders, it was impossible for it to mobilize them at will. Therefore, the divine demon sect master knew what these elders were going to do and who they were going to deal with. The divine demon sect master was very clear about this. Therefore, as soon as Luo Fan said those words, he already knew Luo Fan's identity on this continent. Under such circumstances, he naturally knew that Luo Fan had only stepped onto the path of cultivation for a few years. Therefore, he instinctively did not think that Luo Fan would really become unfathomable and powerful beyond his imagination. According to this inference, there is only one possibility for Luo Fan to be able to float in the air, do things that ordinary people could not do, and easily destroy his external incarnation. He had an unimaginable treasure on him. It could be a magic tool or a magic treasure. It was this treasure that allowed this young man, who had clearly only stepped onto the path of cultivation for a few years, to unleash extraordinary power. This understanding did not make the divine demon sect master panic at all. Instead, he was filled with an inexplicable joy. This treasure could allow a child to easily destroy his external avatar. If it were to fall into his hands, just what level of strength would he be able to display? With this understanding, the sect master of the divine demon sect was too lazy to think too much. He directly controlled the power of the divine demon sect's mountain gate and transformed it into an extremely mysterious armor. Then, he rushed out from his original residence. In the blink of an eye, he was already in midair, facing Luo Fan from a distance. Luo Fan didn't care about the various changes in the divine demon sect's sect master's mind. When he saw the divine demon sect master appear, he frowned. The armor around the god demon sect leader's body was condensed from power, and it contained the remnant aura of Tian Hunzi's will. Not only did it contain unimaginable power, but it was also unimaginably tough and had unimaginable defensive power. Under the protection of such an armor, the divine demon sect's body faintly emitted an aura of indestructibility that was constantly being emitted. In a trance, it was as if he could feel that the entire continent, the entire huge dojo, was watching over him and protecting him. This method of application is far beyond the cultivation level of this continent. Luo Fan instantly came to this realization. Although the cultivation civilization of this continent had developed for trillions of years, it was limited by the continent itself. Their strength was limited to below the immortal realm. Such a restriction allowed this continent to develop the power below the immortal realm almost to the extreme. However, at the same time, the cultivation world of this continent did not have many opportunities to use the power above the immortal realm. As a result, the cultivation world on this continent had reached the acme of perfection when it came to power below the immortal realm. However, it was a little rough when it came to power above the immortal realm. It was difficult to unleash its full power. At this very moment, however, the divine demon sect master in front of Luo Fan had completely violated this convention. The power gathered by the formation was clearly beyond the mortal realm, and had stepped into the immortal realm. However, the use of the divine demon sect master was so superb that it was even more exquisite than the use of the power of the mortal realm on this continent. This made Luo Fan more and more surprised. This is definitely not the original method of the divine demon sect. Luo Fan instantly confirmed his previous guess. Although the divine demon sect master has almost reached the acme of control of the power of the formation, he can't hide the faint traces of disharmony. Clearly, this method of condensing the power of the formation into armor to protect oneself is not something that he has cultivated for a long time. It was not because he had cultivated for a long time, but because he had obtained it recently. Could it be? Luo Fan frowned and thought about it. Thinking of this, the bad feeling in his heart suddenly became stronger. Could it really be like this? An inexplicable wry smile suddenly appeared on Luo Fan's face. The divine demon sect master had come here to teach Luo Fan a lesson, and at the same time to snatch away the treasure that allowed Luo Fan to unleash such terrifying power. Naturally, he would not let Luo Fan think about it for a long time. He swayed his body, and a gigantic godfiend phantom appeared behind him. Following that, he punched out, and the godfiend phantom behind him also punched out. The fist merged with his fist, and with a destructive aura, it blasted towards Luo Fan. As the fist punched out, there was a faint rumble of thunder in the sky, and the entire world seemed to start shaking along with the punch. This effect of driving the power of heaven and earth with the attack meant that the punch had already fused with heaven and earth. It had already received the blessing of heaven and earth, and its power was thousands of times stronger than the power of the divine demon sect master alone. Faced with such a punch, Luo Fan frowned slightly. He raised his hand and drew in the air, and countless threads instantly appeared in front of him. They followed the trajectory of his hand and condensed into a ring in midair. The space-time in the center of the ring fluctuated slightly, as if there was a strange space-time forming within it. Although the divine demon sect master's punch was astonishingly fast and terrifyingly powerful, it was unable to avoid Luo Fan's circle and directly blasted into the ring. The divine demon sect master's eyes suddenly revealed a look of shock. In his opinion, his punch seemed to have blasted into a boundless void. There was no point of force at all, and all the power that surged into it was like a clay ox entering the sea. There was no feedback at all. This feeling was even more terrifying than hitting cotton. After all, although it was uncomfortable to hit cotton, it still hit something. Now it was completely in the void. Luo Fan's body also trembled slightly at this moment. If his real body was here, he could easily kill the divine demon sect master with a single point of his finger. However, at this moment, he was only using his divine soul doppelganger, and his divine soul doppelganger's power was limited to the mortal realm. Such a clone was still a little difficult to deal with when facing the divine demon sect master, who had received the blessing of heaven and earth, and whose strength far exceeded that of the mortal realm. Just now, he seemed to be able to deal with it easily. He only raised his hand and drew a circle, and he easily engulfed the divine demon sect master's punch, eliminating the danger he was in. However, in reality, during this process, Luo Fan had also suffered endless pressure. He could vaguely feel that the force of the punch had surged into his body through the circle he had drawn, causing his body to suffer a great shock. In a daze, he felt like his entire body was about to collapse. Fortunately, Luo Fan's mental state was hundreds of millions of times higher than the Divine Demon Sect Master's, and his control over his will was also much stronger. Facing such an impact, he gathered his will and suddenly charged out, completely dispersing the Divine Demon Sect Master's will, causing him to lose control of the power. It completely dissipated. However, it did not completely dissipate into nothingness. Instead, it recovered the fundamental power of the formation. It was the remaining power of Tian Hun's will that could be condensed on this continent. To other living beings, this power would not be of any benefit if they did not have a special method to use it. Instead, they would be continuously injured by the power. However, to Luo Fan, this was like giving the power to him to control. In that instant, he raised his hand and guided it. This power spun a few times in the void inside his ring and appeared above his other hand. It condensed slightly. And turned into a bolt of lightning. He raised his hand and gently patted it, charging towards the Divine Demon Sect Master. The Divine Demon Sect Master was still in shock from the mystique that Luo Fan had unleashed. Before he could react, he was hit by the bolt of lightning formed by the power that Luo Fan had condensed. Luo Fan's will was much stronger than the Divine Demon Sect Master's. Under his control, the power that he had condensed was naturally many times stronger than the power that the Divine Demon Sect Master had condensed. Under such circumstances, the layer of armor that covered the Divine Demon Sect Master's body was like a piece of paper. Like a piece of paper, it didn't even have the effect of blocking the attack. It was directly torn apart by the lightning that Luo Fan had shot out. The Divine Demon Sect Master had high hopes for the armor and thought that it would not be damaged no matter what. Before the battle, he had not thought about how the armor would react if it was torn apart. At this moment, he could not help but freeze. This pause was the turning point of life and death. The lightning poured into his body without holding anything back. In an instant, the Divine Demon Sect Master's entire body collapsed and turned into countless tiny fragments of powder. Like porcelain, there was not even a gush of blood before it completely dispersed. When the heavenly wind blew, it turned into smoke and disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. At this moment, the entire mountain gate of the Divine Demon Sect below shook violently, and one mountain after another collapsed with a loud bang. Many of the cultivators in the mountain gate were horrified. Only a few hundred of the more powerful cultivators managed to react and rushed out of their original residence in the nick of time. They were not buried by the collapsing mountain. The rest were all buried in the mountain rocks. In just a short while, the entire Divine Demon Sect had been turned into ruins, and 80% of the disciples in the sect had died. This was an outcome that Luo Fan had not expected. However, things had already happened. Luo Fan had already understood what was going on after a little bit of deduction. Normally speaking, the death of the Divine Demon Sect Master should not have too much of an impact on the Divine Demon Sect. At the very least, the mountain gate of the Divine Demon Sect should not have suffered much damage because of his death. However, when the Divine Demon Sect Master refined the power of the formation into an incarnation, the situation was different. By refining the power of the formation, his own life would be connected to the formation. This connection made it so that once the Divine Demon Sect Master died, it would affect the formation. Although such a violent impact was slightly exaggerated, it was only because the method Luo Fan used to kill the Divine Demon Sect Master was too violent. The intense conflict of life and death caused the formation to be unable to adjust itself before it completely followed the Divine Demon Sect Master. Therefore, the entire mountain gate of the Divine Demon Sect would become like this at this moment. The disciples and elders of the Divine Demon Sect who had escaped only reacted at this moment. For a moment, they howled in grief, roared furiously, were in pain, and were hysterical. There were all sorts of expressions. The ruins of the Divine Demon Sect were filled with an indescribable, sorrowful atmosphere. How could this be? Our divine demon sect has been established for 6 billion years and has survived hundreds of calamities. How did it suddenly become like this? Could it be that the heavens want our divine demon sect dead? An extremely old and pained voice suddenly rang out, reverberating in the sky above the ruins of the divine demon sect. This is not the wrath of heaven. Someone destroyed the mountain guarding array in an instant. Another voice filled with grief and indignation sounded. Who is it? Who is it? Come out and accept your death. Noisy curses echoed unceasingly, and the ruins of the divine demon sect became even more chaotic because of this. At this moment, Luo Fan. However, he turned a deaf ear to everything happening below him. He closed his eyes in midair, and the huge gate of ascension in his mind was undergoing an inexplicable change. It was as if there was some kind of power that was slowly acting on the gate of ascension, causing the gate of ascension to shake and slowly open to both sides. This, after he killed the sect leader of the divine demon sect, he felt his entire body lighten, and all the restraints on his mind instantly disappeared. His mind became lively, and there were no longer any obstructions. In that instant, he understood. By killing the divine demon sect and turning the mountain gate of the divine demon sect into ruins, he had finally resolved the karma between him and the Qian family, as well as Qian Tong and his wife. At the very least, it was within the scope of this continent. For Luo Fan, there was karma. It was to remove the last obstacle to his ascension, so that he finally had the possibility to open the door of ascension, which was what was happening now. Just when Luo Fan's mind felt the gate of ascension slowly open, a muffled sound of thunder reverberated in the sky. A golden, auspicious cloud appeared out of thin air thousands of miles above Luo Fan's head. After this golden, auspicious cloud appeared, it slowly sank down, constantly approaching Luo Fan. A brilliant heavenly might instantly appeared in the mountain gate of the divine demon sect. At this moment, all the survivors of the divine demon sect felt that a supreme existence was descending and was suppressing them. It wanted to make them surrender, to make them all kneel down. In the face of such a brilliant heavenly might, not many people could resist it. For a moment, almost all the survivors of the divine demon sect knelt on the ground, lowered their heads, and trembled. They didn't even dare to look up to see what was descending. Only a few old elders were still standing on the ruins, struggling to look up at the sky above, watching the slowly sinking, auspicious cloud. This is a welcoming, auspicious cloud. Someone is going to ascend to the immortal realm. After all, they had lived for a long time and were very clear about the various legends of this continent. The moment they saw this auspicious cloud, their faces became extremely shocked, and only such a thought echoed in their minds. Ascension was the biggest goal that all cultivators pursued. Cultivators painstakingly cultivated. They wholeheartedly pursued the way, disregarding all dangers and disregarding all temptations. Wasn't it just to ascend to become an immortal and live forever? However, although this was their biggest goal, for countless years, legends of ascension had appeared from time to time. However, the cultivators who actually ascended were as rare as phoenix feathers and Chilan horns. Although these elders were already standing at the peak of this continent, they also knew that the possibility of them ascending was extremely small, so small that it was almost impossible. However, at this moment, they suddenly saw the legendary, welcoming, auspicious cloud appear. One could imagine the shock and impact they felt. At this moment, almost all of them had forgotten that the divine demon sect was already in ruins. Everyone who saw the welcoming, auspicious cloud had an indescribable desire in their eyes, as well as a faint feeling of jealousy. Kacha! Suddenly, a loud tremor came from the sky. This tremor shook the heaven and earth, causing all the creatures in this mountain range to feel as if the entire world was shaking violently. This is the Ascension Tribulation. Those elders who could barely raise their heads showed fear on their faces. The Ascension Tribulation was a tribulation that cultivators would definitely encounter when they ascended. The power of this tribulation was extremely terrifying. Out of 10,000 people, it was already very lucky for one person to successfully pass it. As the tremors sounded, black mist suddenly condensed in the sky between Luo Fan and the welcoming, auspicious cloud. In the blink of an eye, Pina formed a tribulation cloud that was even vaster and denser than the auspicious cloud. It also looked even more shocking. The tribulation cloud blocked the path of the guiding cloud, making it impossible for the guiding cloud to descend to a high enough altitude to bring Luo Fan into the so-called immortal world. Kacha sounds continuously came from the tribulation cloud. Parts of the tribulation cloud constantly lit up as if there were countless lightning bolts wreaking havoc within it. The rumbling became more and more intense and louder. Finally, at a certain moment, the countless lightning bolts in the sky were like raindrops that blotted out the sky and the earth as they pounced towards Luo Fan. This is clearly the wrath of the heavens. How is this a heavenly tribulation? Luo Fan couldn't help but frown when he saw the tribulation cloud's behavior. The tribulation cloud didn't give any life to living beings at all. All of its power was unleashed at the same time. If one wanted to block this kind of attack, they would need power that surpassed the itinerant immortal realm by at least 1,000 times. It was obvious that this continent restricted the use of power that surpassed the immortal realm. Faced with the countless lightning bolts, Luo Fan frowned in deep thought. However, he had no intention of retreating. He raised his hand and waved gently. Countless threads instantly gathered around him to form a strange formation. After this formation appeared, the entire world seemed to freeze. The lightning bolts that were descending from the sky seemed to slow down by countless times. Then, the figure of a creation god appeared around the formation and directly treated the formation as its own heart. Chapter 1082. This method was clearly what Luo Fan had done when the elders of the divine demon sect had dealt with him. He had constructed a mysterious array formation and condensed the remnant will of Tian Hunzi on this continent into the body of a creation god-fiend. Of course, the method that Luo Fan used was still very different from the methods that the elders of the divine demon sect had used against him. Luo Fan's realm was much higher than that of the elders of the divine demon sect, and even all the cultivators that had existed in the history of the divine demon sect. After understanding the principle of this array formation, he only needed to think about it, and he would naturally be able to create a method that was countless times more exquisite based on this principle. At this moment, the remnant will of Tian Hunzi that Luo Fan had condensed actually seemed to be inexplicably alive. Its eyes were not completely blank, and it seemed to have some kind of extremely mysterious consciousness. Apart from the majesty and vastness that the creation god-fiend had to have, the roar also contained a new charm. It was a cry that the consciousness of a living being had just been born to announce its existence to the world. As the creation god-fiend raised its hands, the countless thunderbolts in the sky that were like raindrops seemed to have been gathered by a terrifying force, and they instantly condensed between the creation god-fiend's hands. In the blink of an eye, the entire sky became smooth, and the countless thunderbolts condensed into the shape of a sphere between the god-fiend's hands. This sphere was like a pitch-black hole, and it was constantly emitting an aura that seemed to be able to devour everything. The tribulation cloud in the sky paused for a moment before it moved again, and it was even more terrifying. Even more thunderbolts instantly pounced out of the tribulation cloud, and in the blink of an eye, they shrouded the entire void. This time, the creation god-fiend did not react like before. Instead, it roared and the muscles on its body bulged. Following that, the entire black hole-like thunderbolt sphere shook. It seemed to have transcended time and space. Almost at the same time that it left the god-fiend's hands, it appeared in the sky and within the tribulation cloud. It was a loud rumble. The entire sky shook violently. The tribulation clouds, which could have lasted for dozens of days, were scattered in an instant, and all the power contained in them exploded in all directions. The surrounding space-time was shattered by the terrifying power of the explosion, turning into countless horrifying fragments that covered the void like a dense fog, covering everything in the sky above Luo Fan's head. Luo Fan had long expected such a change. However, for the surviving cultivators of the divine demon sect, it was as if they were looking at a miracle. Every single one of them had a look of disbelief in their eyes. How was this possible? The immortal ascension tribulation needs at least 9 days and 9 nights to be completely over. How could this person pass the immortal ascension tribulation so easily? This kind of thought kept reverberating in the minds of those knowledgeable elders of the divine demon sect. Luo Fan looked up at the fog formed by the shattering of space-time. He didn't care about the shock the people below were experiencing. He just quietly waited for the changes above. At this moment, the golden rays of light pierced through the fog, one after another. They were like sharp swords, piercing holes in the fog one after another. Then, with a soft, sizzling sound, the fog was directly crushed by countless golden rays of light. A golden auspicious cloud replaced the space-time fog above and descended at a faster speed than before, getting closer and closer to Luo Fan. In the face of such a change, Luo Fan couldn't help but smile. Seems like it's a success. I don't know about the ascension of this continent. What exactly is going on? Where will I go after ascending? What is the secret of this dojo? As Luo Fan was thinking about this, the auspicious cloud had already descended around him and wrapped him up. At this moment, Luo Fan felt that the surrounding space-time was changing. His body seemed to be passing through layers of space-time and entering a different world. The surrounding golden, auspicious cloud didn't obstruct his vision. At this moment, he clearly saw how the surrounding auspicious cloud worked, how it changed the surrounding space-time, and how it led to a brand new space-time. This was a kind of overall behavior. It was a change exerted by the entire dojo, but it didn't exist independently on the golden, auspicious cloud. It was not just the golden, auspicious cloud that was taking effect at this moment. This change was grand and vast. It made Luo Fan's real body stop what he was doing at this moment. He completely focused his attention on this spirit doppelganger and carefully sensed everything that was happening throughout the whole process. This change of the entire dojo contained the fundamental mysteries of this dojo. If he could comprehend it, it would be very beneficial for Luo Fan to truly understand the mysteries of this dojo. Naturally, he couldn't let it go. So that's how it is. This dojo actually has 2 layers of space-time, or at least there are 2 layers of space-time. Luo Fan thought to himself as he sensed the various changes that were happening inside the golden, auspicious cloud. Originally, when Luo Fan found out that there was such a thing as ascension in this Taoist rite, he secretly tried to figure out where ascension would lead to. Ascension could lead to other continents or to other space-times. Even if he ascended to another space-time, that space-time could have many kinds of relationships with this dojo. However, the structure of the exterior and the interior was the most unlikely one that Luo Fan had expected to exist. After all, although the exterior and interior space-time seemed to be 2 different space-times, they were usually just 2 sides of the same world. Normally, the level of power between the 2 should be the same. Since the level of power was the same, of course, there was no such thing as ascension. It was because of this conjecture that Luo Fan said this at this time. The golden auspicious cloud took effect extremely quickly. Almost in a breath's time, Luo Fan's spirit doppelganger had already directly passed through layers of space-time and entered a strange space-time. Through the connection between the doppelganger and himself, Luo Fan's main body instantly saw everything in the space-time that the doppelganger had entered. This was a round sky and square earth, a world that was so vast that it was almost boundless. The concentration of vitality in this world was not much higher than that of the world where the spirit doppelganger had previously been. This was just as Luo Fan had guessed about the nature of the exterior and interior space-time. But this world had no restrictions on the power of a cultivator at all. It was not as restrictive as the continent where the spirit doppelganger had previously been, and it was also not as restrictive as the 2 continents that Luo Fan had seen previously. In this space-time, power, on the other hand, could be improved without any restrictions. As long as one could do it, and as long as one's realm could reach it, there was absolutely no problem. There was no need for anything else. As long as this characteristic existed, this space-time was enough for all the continents on the exterior space-time of the Taoist, right, to pursue painstakingly. The place where Luo Fan ascended was a platform on the top of a mountain. This platform had a radius of 1,000 feet. The surface area was not considered large, but revealed an extremely ancient feeling. The extremely vicissitudes of time made anyone who stood on this platform feel that they were no longer ordinary, and that their status had been raised by several levels because of the existence of this platform. Looking into the distance, this world vaguely gave people the feeling of a universe on Earth before the heaven and earth had shattered. It was similarly grand and vast. If there was a fundamental difference between the two, it was the degree of stability of space-time, as well as the level of the living beings that existed in this world. With the existence of such a man-made platform, why is there no one guarding here? Luo Fan looked around and finally confirmed that he was the only one here. He could not help but feel slightly surprised. In this world where there were no restrictions on power, there was naturally no need for him to feel aggrieved. With a slight thought, endless essence chi quickly gathered towards him, directly transforming into the power of the unified heaven scripture of primordial chaos, directly promoting the cultivation of this scripture to break through its own limits. He had stepped into a whole new world. At this moment, Luo Fan's spirit body, which was formed completely according to the cultivation system of that continent, began to undergo a mysterious change. Real flesh and blood began to appear inside his body from the inside out. A skeleton gradually began to take shape under the activation of the unified heaven scripture of primordial chaos. This skeleton was sparkling and translucent like jade. There was a kind of chaotic gray in it, and it naturally emitted an extremely powerful aura. Although this skeleton alone was not as tough and powerful as when Luo Fan's Dao Fruit Dao had cultivated to the itinerant immortal realm, it was much stronger than the skeleton cultivated by ordinary cultivation methods. After this skeleton took shape, the power of the heavenly scripture continued to pour into it without any hesitation. Under the activation of this power, his bone marrow began to be born and gradually filled the insides of his bones. It emitted an extremely rich life force, causing flesh, tendons, organs, skin, and even hair to gradually grow on his bones. After a few dozen breaths, the original spirit body of Luo Fan's spirit clone had completely transformed into a real body of flesh and blood. Furthermore, it was a body of flesh and blood that was extremely compatible with the way of spirits. It contained almost all the advantages of a spirit body. This body could disperse and gather, separate and combine, and even its recovery ability was unimaginably powerful. Regrowing lost limbs and regrowing flesh and blood was definitely not a problem. Although it had not reached the terrifying state of being reborn from a single drop of blood, it was not far off. I see. So this is the secret hidden in these cultivation methods. This thought flashed across Luo Fan's mind as he sensed the changes in this body. The entire process of this body's transformation was completely formed by the natural activation of the cultivation method. In other words, this body contained the various mysteries of the cultivation method. Evidently, with Luo Fan's current realm, his perception and grasp of his own body had already reached an unbelievable level. Under such circumstances, he had already understood the various mysteries of this body the moment this body was formed. Then, he used these mysteries to grasp the hidden secrets of the cultivation method. It's a pity that this only contains a trace of the mysteries of Tian Hunzi's cultivation method. I've gained very little from it. Luo Fan could not help but sigh after sensing everything. This cultivation method was naturally developed on that continent, and it was a cultivation method that was completely compatible with the essence of that continent. Therefore, the mysteries of this cultivation method were the mysteries of the continent, which was also a part of the mysteries of the dojo. Naturally, it also contained a small part of the mysteries of Tian Hanzi's cultivation. Based on the mysteries contained in this body, Luo Fan vaguely sensed that there was an extremely powerful existence underground in this world. He did not know whether this existence was a living being or an object, but it had become one with the entire dojo, vaguely suppressing everything in the dojo. This caused Luo Fan's body, which was naturally formed based on the cultivation method, to feel a faint pressure. His thoughts moved slightly. He lifted his foot and took a light step before his figure turned into a long rainbow and flew away. He did not know whether that living being or an object was underground, but he could not drill into the ground here. After all, this was a mountain, and there was a platform that was used to receive ascending cultivators. There were many arrangements and many well-hidden defenses. These are nothing to Luo Fan. However, there was no need for him to challenge these arrangements just for convenience. He did not forget the attack he had suffered when he entered this dojo. The strength of the attack told him that there was a hidden power that could threaten him in this dojo. If he wanted to do as he pleased here, he would need to find a source of that power. As he flew away in the form of a long rainbow, Luo Fan sensed the mysteries of this body. The entire world, the entire dojo, they were all creating favorable conditions for this body. This method of flying away in the form of a long rainbow did not seem to consume his power at all. Instead, it was as if the world was naturally bringing him along. The ease and freedom he felt was something that his main body could only feel in the world that he had created. After flying for tens of thousands of miles, he arrived on a flat ground that did not have anything special. Just as he was about to land, he suddenly sensed an inexplicable aura coming towards Luo Fan from the sky at an extremely fast speed. This aura was firm and strong, and it was already at the level of a golden immortal. However, it was very well concealed, and the aura that it exuded was extremely obscure. Sensing the arrival of this aura, Luo Fan frowned. The firm and strong aura was secondary. What was more important was that this aura gave him a very familiar feeling. At this moment, a strange yet familiar voice entered Luo Fan's ears. "You're a lot slower. I've been waiting here for you for several years." When Luo Fan heard this voice, he relaxed his brows. His brows relaxed, and a smile appeared on his face. "So it's Battle God's son. I thought I was already considered fast. I didn't expect that you would be several years faster than me. I'm really impressed," Luo Fan said. At this moment, the aura that was at the level of a golden immortal stopped in front of Luo Fan, and a cute boy who looked like a child of 6 or 7 years old appeared. The cute boy had a faint smile on his face. He had one hand behind his back, and he looked quite mature. When Luo Fan saw this person, he couldn't help but slightly widen his eyes. After a while, a faint smile appeared on his face. This person was obviously the Battle God's son who was born from the Soul Clone. Although the original Battle God's son wasn't very strong, he still looked like a normal person. Now that the Soul Clone had reincarnated, he actually became like a child. The contrast was so great that people couldn't help but laugh. "How did you become like this?" Luo Fan didn't hide the doubt in his heart and asked directly. "I'm really ashamed to talk about this." Battle God's son looked at his body and said helplessly, "The method I chose was very effective. It was normal to cultivate on that continent, and there weren't any special changes to my body. But after entering this space-time, when I naturally constructed a flesh and blood body, my body was naturally constructed like this. It really makes people speechless." When Luo Fan heard this, he couldn't help but laugh and congratulate Battle God's son for being young forever. Battle God's son's face couldn't help but fall, and he helplessly retorted a few words. After a series of replies, Luo Fan then asked, "You've been in this space-time for a few years. You must have gained a lot?" Battle God's son's expression became serious when he heard Luo Fan's question. He said, "This is what I'm going to say next." When Luo Fan saw the change in Battle God's son's expression, he knew that things had changed. He frowned and didn't say anything else. He carefully listened to what Battle God's son had to say. This space-time, this training ground, they're all very problematic. Battle God Sun's first words caused Luo Fan's expression to change slightly. I'd like to hear the details. Do you feel that the master of this training ground died in this training ground? Battle God Sun asked. I already know about this. When I was on that continent, I once saw a cultivator condensing the remaining will of the master of the training ground with the help of a formation to form a divine demon to fight against the enemy. Luo Fan said. Battle God Sun didn't doubt that Luo Fan could find out that Tian Hunzi had died in this training ground, although he didn't know what method Luo Fan had used. Similarly, Luo Fan wasn't surprised that Battle God Sun would know about this. After all, between the two of them, one was a Tao master, and the other was a powerful existence who had set foot on the third step below the sage. This was a fact that wasn't hidden. It was too easy for them to find out. Have you ever wondered why the master of this training ground would die in this training ground? Battle God Sun didn't care about the method Luo Fan used and directly asked. Hearing Battle God Sun's words, Luo Fan couldn't help but be stunned. Chapter 1083. I would like to hear the details. Luo Fan didn't make random guesses. Instead, he spoke directly. The Battle God Sun sighed. The reason why the owner of the dojo died in the dojo was because he encountered an enemy he couldn't defend against. Even if this dojo was created by him and his techniques here were stronger than in the outside world, he still couldn't defend against such an enemy. In the end, he died and his soul disappeared. Luo Fan was already thinking about this. When he heard the Battle God Sun's answer, he was only a little surprised. He wasn't too shocked. After all, as a powerful cultivator who had reached the 8th step below the sage realm, Tian Hunzi naturally wouldn't die of old age. Therefore, the most likely reason for his death was because he encountered an enemy. Since you are talking about this now, could it be that the enemy still exists? Suddenly, Luo Fan was shocked. His eyes widened and he exclaimed, if that was the case, then things would be terrible. One should know that Tian Hunzi was someone who had reached the 8th step. Compared to Luo Fan and the Battle God Sun, such an existence was much more powerful. Even so, when faced with the enemy, he was still killed in this dojo. Therefore, one could imagine how weak Luo Fan and the Battle God Sun were. The Battle God Sun glanced at Luo Fan and said, there is no direct evidence to prove this. However, I feel that deep inside this dojo, there's a power that completely opposes cultivators like us. It is the power of demons. Demons? Luo Fan frowned. The demons that the Battle God Sun was talking about, of course, were not the demons mentioned in the demonic cultivation methods. Instead, it was a real demon that completely opposes the cultivation world. That's right, demons. According to ancient legends, the world has encountered many calamities. Every time a calamity occurs, there will be some power left behind that cannot be eliminated. Therefore, the sages and supremes sealed this power in a space-time outside of the world. This space-time is commonly known as the realm of demons, and the power inside the demon realm is the power of the demon realm. Seeing Luo Fan's confused look, Battle God Sun explained. In that case, the power of the demons is actually the remnant power of the Great Tribulation? Luo Fan frowned. Luo Fan had seen the Great Tribulation of heaven and earth in the primordial world. However, back then, even he could rely on the power of the entire primordial world to resist it and even strengthen the primordial world by many times. From the looks of it, the Great Tribulation of the heavens and earth doesn't seem so terrifying after all. Of course, this thought only flashed past his mind. After all, the Great Tribulation of heaven and earth that he had encountered was only the first one or two. The power of the second attack was already many times stronger than the first. If it were to continue like this the third, fourth, fifth, and even a ninth time, one could vaguely imagine how powerful it would be. As such, it was not surprising to see how powerful the Great Tribulation of the heavens and earth was. Fellow Taoist, don't underestimate the remnants of the tribulation. It must be known that this power was something that even saints and supremes could not eliminate. Moreover, it has been sealed for such a long time. Many incredible changes have already happened. Now, even if the power evolved into another world or even gave birth to another saint, I would not be surprised. Seeing that Luo Fan did not seem to think much of it, the son of war god hurriedly said. Hearing that, Luo Fan came to a sudden realization. He nodded and said, "Fellow Taoist, what you said makes sense. I was indeed wrong before. How many billions of years had it been since the last great tribulation of heaven and earth? Even the son of war god could not say for sure. At least, among the current generation of cultivators, other than the seven saints, basically no one knew the specifics of the great tribulation of heaven and earth. This situation could only be the time when the great tribulation of heaven and earth appeared. It could only have appeared in at least a few trillion years ago. Even if it was a dojo, after billions of years of development, it would still form all sorts of inconceivable situations and produce all sorts of strange things. Not to mention the remnants of the power that even saints could not do anything about. Just as the son of war god said, with such a terrifying power, it would not be a big problem to create a few saints. If it could not be compared to a saint, how could the remnants of the power make the saints helpless and could only seal it? Where did you find the power of the demon? Luo Fan asked. Fellow Taoist, please come with me. The son of war god said. As he spoke, he turned around and shot up into the sky, turning into a rainbow that shot up into the sky. Luo Fan did not hesitate. He also turned into a long rainbow and followed behind the son of war god. The two of them flew for half a day. In Luo Fan's perception, they had even flown hundreds of millions of light years away. The long rainbow that the two of them turned into finally stopped in a strange void. After coming to a stop, Luo Fan released his perception and instantly saw everything in this void. This was a boundless void that seemed to have no end. This place was already extremely far away from the space-time that Luo Fan had ascended into. Looking down, the entire space-time had even become a small bright spot. The stability of the space-time here was countless times stronger than that of that space-time. It even made Luo Fan feel that this seemed to be much stronger than the universe of Earth before it was broken. This extremely stable area of space-time was limited to the void within a radius of 1,000,000 miles. Outside this area, the void returned to normal. It was even more stable than the space-time below by 1,000 times. In an instant, Luo Fan knew that there was a problem here. This is where the power of the demon exists. The son of war god signaled to Luo Fan. Luo Fan frowned, his eyes shining brightly as he looked at the void of 1,000,000 miles in front of him. His meticulous and precise perception penetrated into every inch of this void, thoroughly investigating everything in this void. Although his current spirit doppelganger only had the power of an itinerant immortal, it was still in the same realm after all. Its perceptive ability was extremely shocking. In a short while, he had already discovered the location of the power that the son of war god had mentioned. That power was the fundamental reason why this space-time was more stable and stable than the space-time outside. It permeated every inch of this space, and it even froze time and stabilized space. That power did not have any evil charm, nor did it feel like ghosts were crying and gods were howling. Instead, it was a kind of neutral and peaceful mixed with a kind of deeply hidden destruction. So this is the demon. Luo Fan sighed and murmured. Although this power is weak, its essence is extremely high. Even if my original body came here, there is not much hope of defeating it. Therefore, I need to borrow your power to completely seal it. The son of war god said. Hearing this, Luo Fan suddenly understood. It turned out that the son of war god had pulled him here because of the wonderful three-dimensional talisman technique that he had displayed in the battle back then. The son of war god had eagerly answered all of his questions. However, although that was the case, Luo Fan did not plan to directly follow his instructions. Instead, he shook his head and said, "This matter is not urgent for now." Hearing this, the son of war god could not help but frown. He was a little confused and a little dissatisfied. He said, "Do you have any other plans? This power is extremely stable. There will not be a problem in a short period of time. To seal it, there is no need to be impatient. I see that the owner of this dojo has quite a lot of remnant will. Why not condense the remnant will and see if we can obtain its memory and find out the truth of this power?" Luo Fan said with a smile. Hearing this, the son of war god came to a sudden realization. There was an indescribable regret in his eyes. It was obvious that he had not thought of this before. If he had thought of this earlier, he would have done this a long time ago. Why would there be a need for Luo Fan? Condensing the remnant will of a dead cultivator was an extremely difficult task for a normal cultivator. However, for a powerful cultivator like the son of war god who had set foot on the third step, it was a matter of minutes. He only needed to think about it, and he could create thousands of such techniques. What you said makes sense. However, I've been blinded by worry. I have never thought of this. The son of war god sighed. Luo Fan smiled. There are worries in the heart. It is not a big deal to be blinded once in a while. As he spoke, he carefully sensed for a moment and raised his hand to draw in the air. Streams of power cultivated from the heaven's scripture of chaotic elements continuously flowed out of his hand. They condensed into incomparably solid threads that looked like real objects in the air. They constantly intertwined and swam in the air. As Luo Fan drew, the outline of the threads gradually took shape and became clearer. That was none other than a humanoid figure. Although this human figure was formed by countless threads, it was very lifelike and looked extremely real. At first glance, it even looked like a living creature made of flesh and blood. Looking at it, it was clearly the appearance of the creation god fiend that Luo Fan had seen a few times before. In other words, it looked like Tian Hunzi. One exquisite formation. More importantly, it is completely set up to deal with this dojo. The power of this dojo is more than 10 times stronger than normal. Battle Godson couldn't help but sigh in admiration as he watched from the side. Luo Fan ignored the son of war god. After the last thread returned to his position, he softly shouted, "Lead." Then, the countless threads that outlined the creation god fiend suddenly lit up. Then, like a black hole, it began to wildly attract something that existed in the void. This kind of suction force was very mysterious. Although it looked extremely terrifying, as if it had affected the entire dojo for hundreds of millions of light years. Even Luo Fan and the Battle God Sun were not affected at all. Even their clothes were not lifted by the suction force at all. It seemed like this suction force was happening in another space-time and didn't affect the space-time that the two of them were in at all. When this suction force was produced, the entire dojo, whether it was the outer space-time or the inner space-time, whether it was the so-called immortal realm or the many continents in the outer space-time, was instantly affected by this suction force. All living creatures instantly discovered the existence of this suction force. There was such a suction force acting on the entire world that they could sense. However, none of them were affected at all. It was as if this suction force was just an illusion. As this suction force was used, the creation god fiend's figure became brighter and brighter. Its entire form became more and more real, more and more obvious, and more like a body of flesh and blood. This entire process lasted for 3 days and 3 nights before it finally stopped. The moment this suction force stopped, the creation god fiend's body began to emit a charm that was in harmony with heaven and earth. He stood there as if he was truly an existence that could split heaven and earth apart. He was indomitable and indomitable. That kind of unyielding stand, that kind of eternal immortality, that kind of supremacy caused Luo Fan and Battle God Sun to be unable to help but be secretly shocked. "How much of his will did you condense?" the son of war god asked in surprise. "About 60%. Unfortunately, it had been too long since he had died. Too much of his will had already been destroyed, and what he could condense now was not enough. The amount that he can condense now is only 60%. Luo Fan sighed. 60%? The son of war god looked at Luo Fan in shock. After a while, he shook his head and sighed helplessly. "I originally thought that you were only talented in battle. I didn't expect you to have such attainments in the field of formations. It's really enviable. The son of war god's words came from the bottom of his heart. To be able to condense 60% of the remnant will of a cultivator who had been dead for trillions of years. This was a huge achievement that he didn't even dare to think about. If he did it himself, he wouldn't be able to condense more than 60% of the remnant, well, even if he had been dead for hundreds of thousands of years, let alone the fact that he had been dead for trillions of years. You're flattering me. I just happened to see the method of condensing the remnant will of the owner of this dojo in advance. If you had seen it in advance, you might have done better than me. Luo Fan smiled. The son of war god shook his head and sighed. He said, I still have self-awareness about this kind of thing. Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Let's see how much of the owner's memory is left. What time is it now? At this moment, an absolutely impossible voice entered the ears of Luo Fan and the son of war god. This voice made Luo Fan and the son of war god shudder. They turned to look at the source of the voice and realized that it was the creation divine demon who had spoken. In other words, it was the remnant will of Tian Hunzi that had been condensed by Luo Fan. How is this possible? This thought appeared in the minds of Luo Fan and the son of war god at the same time. Condensing the remnant will was similar to condensing memories. It was the product of condensing memories. Although it looked exactly the same as the living being before it died, it was actually just a carrier of memories and information. It wasn't a real living being and was similar to a hard disk that existed in the mortal world. However, at this moment, this remnant will that had been condensed actually spoke without the orders of Luo Fan and the son of war god. What kind of absurdity was that? The two of them couldn't help but be shocked. The son of war god immediately suspected that Luo Fan was playing a joke on him and purposely ordered the remnant will of the owner of this dojo to speak. However, he quickly realized that he was wrong. This was because the shock in Luo Fan's eyes was no less than his. As for whether the shock was real or fake, the battle god's son was confident that he could distinguish it even if it was an existence of the same level. Thus, he instantly dispelled his own guess and looked at the creation god in bewilderment. Who are you? Luo Fan had already regained his senses. He suppressed the shock in his heart and asked, Me? You can call me Tian Hunzi. According to what you said, I am the owner of this dojo and the creation divine demon that was condensed by your formation. The creation divine demon smiled. Looking at him, he was completely a living being. It was hard to imagine that he was just a product condensed from the remnant will of a dead being. What time is it now? I think I asked the wrong question. There is no time or era in this world. You must be very confused about how I should explain this. Then let me ask in a different way. How long has this dojo been abandoned? The Tian Hunzi frowned. It really is Tian Hunzi. But why is he like a real living being? This thought flashed through Luo Fan's mind. This dojo has been abandoned for at least 70 trillion years. We haven't been here for a long time, so we haven't confirmed the exact time. The son of war god answered the Tian Hunzi. So it's been that long. The Tian Hunzi sighed when he heard this. A dazed expression appeared on his face as if he was thinking back to the glorious years of the past. My master, the Grand Dao ancestor, is he doing well? After a while, the Grand Dao ancestor returned to his senses and asked, The Grand Marshal Uncle is a saint sovereign. Naturally, he couldn't be better. The son of war god said matter-of-factly, I should have thought of it. No matter how long it has been, no matter how many batches of us saints have changed, saint sovereigns are always high above and look down on all things in the mortal world. The Tian Hunzi sighed helplessly. His voice was filled with a sense of vicissitudes, helplessness, and yearning. From the moment he started speaking, the Tian Hunzi no longer emitted any aura. He seemed like an ordinary person, but there was an indescribable temperament that appeared on his body. This was the temperament of someone who had already seen through life and death, and seen through everything. You are not Tian Hunzi. What exactly are you? Luo Fan interrupted at this time. Chapter 1084. Hee. Looks like you're the one who set up this formation. Tian Hunzi laughed. Luo Fan carefully sensed the structure of the creation god-fiend god in front of him, and found that at this moment, the entire body of the creation god fiend god had actually twisted into a eddy, completely covering up the traces of the array he had set up before. The entire body looked like a living cultivator, and there were no signs of an array condensing. He probed and sensed like this, but what he obtained was very little. He could only faintly feel a strange connection extending from the body to his own mind. It was because of this connection that Luo Fan was certain that this person was definitely not the real Tian Hunzi. Fundamentally speaking, I'm not the true son of Tian Hun. The real son of Tian Hun had died billions of years ago. I'm just a condensed form of Tian Hunzi's remnant memories. I look real and intelligent, but I'm not a living being in essence. I don't even have a life source. If this wasn't Tian Hunzi's dojo, I would be a completely dead object. Tian Hunzi said nonchalantly. When Luo Fan and Battle God Sun heard this, they instantly came to a realization. They knew why the condensed form of the master of the dojo's remnant consciousness was like Tian Hunzi's resurrection. Apart from the fact that Tian Hunzi's cultivation level was extremely high back then, and the fact that even his remnant will possessed all sorts of unbelievable power, the most important reason was the existence of this dojo. The relationship between a dojo and the owner of the dojo was one and the same, and there were all sorts of magical effects. There were all sorts of wondrous uses that could not be described with words. The only difference between this remnant and a real living being was its life essence. The dojo could slightly make up for this. Although it couldn't replace the life source forever, it definitely wouldn't be a problem for a short period of time. That was why this situation happened. I see. I didn't expect this dojo to have such wondrous uses. Perhaps I can use the same method when I die in the future. Battle God's Sun sighed. The same method? If you risk your life to return to your dojo before you die in the future. Perhaps you'll be able to revive once in a while in the future, but that won't be you anymore. Everything about him no longer has any meaning to you. What's the use of that? Tian Hunzi couldn't help laughing. It may not be useful, but, after all, it was a slim hope. After all, it would allow one's self-imprint to remain for a longer period of time. Perhaps one day, the opportunity would come. He might not even be able to be revived. The battle god's son had naturally thought of this question before. At this moment, he spoke without any hesitation. Opportunity. I don't know when such an opportunity will appear, although I didn't specifically wait. However, he has already been dead for trillions of years. Where is his fortuitous encounter now? Tian Hunzi sighed. It's just a few trillion years. If we can't wait, then we'll wait another 100 trillion years. If we can't wait another 1,000 trillion years, then we'll wait another 1,000 trillion years. Time is endless. There's always hope. Battle God Sun laughed. Your mentality is really enviable. However, when you reach my level of cultivation, you'll know how rare it is to wait for such an opportunity to come back to life. Tian Hunzi smiled. Actually, Master had already predicted my death a long time ago. But I died anyway. Why is that? Have you thought about it? Tian Hun didn't say anything else and directly asked. I think the saint didn't think that he should interfere with your fate. Luo Fan answered at this moment. Perhaps that's the reason. However, more importantly, I've already lost the desire to live. Eternal life is no longer a blessing or a reward for me. It's a torture. Tian Hunzi shook his head and smiled. These words shocked both Luo Fan and the battle god's son. From the time I stepped onto the path of cultivation until my death, I've lived for a total of 18 trillion years. It was not long after I started cultivating that I joined Master's tutelage. In other words, I've been a saint's disciple for a total of 18 trillion years. Tian Hunzi's eyes flashed with reminiscence as he said, 18 trillion years. Such a long period of time may only be an instant to the world, but to any cultivator, it's already a long period of time that can make people feel hopeless. In such a long period of time, I enjoyed all the generous conditions provided by Master, suffered all the tests set by Master, endured all the pain, and painstakingly, and finally raised my cultivation level to the 8th level below the Saint Realm. 18 trillion years. The battle god's son took a deep breath. Although the battle god Sun had experienced a long period of time since he started cultivating, it was only a few 100 billion years. He couldn't imagine what he would be like after 18 trillion years. Would he have already become a saint, or would he have lost the desire to live? Thinking about this, the battle god Sun suddenly shivered, because he suddenly understood that if he still hadn't become a saint after 18 trillion years, then the biggest possibility was that he would lose the desire to live and give up on his own life. After understanding all of this, the battle god Sun suddenly understood why the disciples of so many sages had changed generation after generation in the past countless years. Why they had powerful and unshakable backers and were already immortal and could live as long as the heavens, but they still disappeared from this world. Thinking about this, he glanced at Luo Fan and found that Luo Fan was also looking at him. In his eyes, there was shock and realization. Obviously, it wasn't much different for what he was thinking. He had also thought of the various historical truths that had been hidden over the years. Such a long path of cultivation, you may think that it's just a number. You may think that since you're constantly improving, you'll reach the goal of becoming a saint after a few more years. Tianhunzi sighed. Naturally, Luo Fan and the battle god Sun shook their heads at the same time. Tianhun didn't care about their expressions and continued, "I'm here now, and I'm very responsible." "You're wrong. The stronger you are, the more you'll cultivate. The more you'll feel the power of a saint. The more you'll understand your own weakness. When I stepped on the 8th step below the saint, I finally saw the power of a saint when I met my teacher. It's a kind of power that makes people despair. At that time, I even felt that my life, the traces of my existence in countless space-times, and even the saints didn't need to move, didn't need to think, just had this subconscious flash in the depths of my mind. It would be completely erased. When I understood this, I knew that even if I stepped on the 9th step below the saint, I wouldn't be any better facing a saint. Yes, this isn't a wild guess. I have a friend. He's the one who stepped on the 9th step. I know his strength very well. Of course, he's many times stronger than me, but his essence hasn't changed." Tianhunzi said. As soon as he finished his words, Luo Fan and the battle god Sun's expressions changed. At the same time, the battle god Sun's face turned pale and gloomy. "How is this possible?" the battle god Sun murmured. It was obvious that he couldn't take the blow and couldn't believe what Tianhunzi said was the truth. After all, he had challenged a saint before. Although he limited the saint to only use 1/billionth of his strength and didn't even use any saint techniques, it was still a challenge to a saint. All this time, he had been ashamed of this challenge and claimed that he didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth. However, he was still somewhat proud of this challenge. Since the creation of heaven and earth, who would dare to do such a thing? However, at this moment, after hearing Tianhunzi describe how powerful a saint was, he realized how much he despised a saint back then. 1/billionth of his strength? Even if a saint did not use any power, as long as there was a trace of dissatisfaction in the bottom of his heart towards his challenge, his existence would be completely erased. In this world, there would be no trace of his existence for billions of years and billions of years down the line. He didn't suspect that Tianhunzi was lying. What was the point of lying about this? Could it be that bragging about a saint's strength would bring him back to life? A saint. At this moment, Luo Fan was inexplicably shocked. He had tried his best to guess how terrifying a saint was. Only now did he realize that he had underestimated saint. However, even though he understood this, he didn't feel dispirited. Instead, he felt an inexplicable fighting spirit. Since a saint is so powerful, then I must become a saint. I must be as powerful as a saint. The reason why there was such a huge difference in mentality between him and the battle god Sun and Tianhunzi was not because Luo Fan's Tao-seeking heart had reached such a terrifying state. Although Luo Fan's Tao-seeking heart was quite firm, it wasn't at such an exaggerated level. The reason why he could maintain his fighting spirit and didn't become dispirited like the battle god Sun and Tianhunzi was because he had a backup plan. Luo Fan was only a clone of his clone when he was on Earth before the world shattered. He still had a clone when he was in the Dharma ending age. However, this split body was not his real body. the one that existed in the untainted universe, which was an unknown distance away from Earth, was his real body. He didn't believe that a supreme saint could cross so many layers to destroy his real body. With such a backup plan, although the saint's strength was shocking, it didn't pose a threat to him. The degree of shock was naturally the same as the battle god's son and Tianhunzi. Because of this, Luo Fan was able to maintain his fighting spirit. Tianhunzi looked at the different performances of Luo Fan and the battle god's son and couldn't help but be surprised. He had expected the battle god's son's performance. After all, he had experienced it once, and his performance was even worse than the battle god's son's. However, he couldn't understand Luo Fan's performance. When he heard that sages were so powerful and that he was still a long way from becoming a sage, even though he had just reached the pinnacle of the sage-to-be stage not too long ago, he found out that the person in front of him, who seemed to have just reached the pinnacle of the sage-to-be, was able to maintain such a fighting spirit. This completely subverted his understanding. For a moment, the way he looked at Luo Fan changed and became more serious. Are you trying to destroy our fighting spirit by saying this now? Luo Fan came back to his senses and frowned at Tianhunzi. Haha, of course not. I'm destroying your fighting spirit. What's in it for me? I'm just thanking you for using the formation to condense me. That's why I'm telling you in advance what you'll find out in the future. Don't you think that the weaker you are, the weaker you will feel when you know this? For example, aren't you recovering faster than him? Tianhunzi said. His words seemed reasonable, but it wasn't. The weaker one was the weaker they would feel when they find out how powerful a saint was. However, it couldn't be that much weaker. It was even more impossible for it to be like what Luo Fan was doing now. It didn't cause his mind to collapse, and instead, it stimulated a stronger fighting spirit. He said these words, obviously just to test Luo Fan. He was very curious as to how Luo Fan could recover so quickly. It was obvious that he wanted Luo Fan to reveal the reason himself, so that he could satisfy his curiosity. Luo Fan was well aware of this. Therefore, he didn't continue the sentence. Instead, he said, "Is that so? Why don't I feel that you have good intentions? Instead, it seems more like you are jealous and want to inflict the same fate that you experienced on others, so that others will feel the despair that you felt? Perhaps I do have this thought." Tianhunzi laughed without a care. At this moment, Tianhunzi's body suddenly trembled. His entire body suddenly collapsed. His spirit disappeared in a flash in front of Luo Fan and Tianhunzi. It seems that the shock he received was too strong. Tianhunzi was slightly stunned. He sighed. Luo Fan frowned. He closed his eyes and instantly shifted his thoughts back to his main body. His main body instantly stood up and took a step forward. Threads surrounded him, and his body instantly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of the cave that Battle God's son had created. When he arrived, he saw Battle God's son walking out of the cave in a daze. "Where are you going now?" Luo Fan saw this and hurriedly asked. "Don't worry, I won't lose my will to live." Battle God's son saw Luo Fan and forced himself to focus and said, "Now, I want to see Master and ask for guidance." When Luo Fan heard this, he opened his mouth and wanted to say something but couldn't. In the end, he could only let out a sigh and said, "I wish you all the best." At this moment, Battle God's son forced a smile and said, "Now, I can't explore with you. I'm really sorry. Originally, I said that I would go to many dojos with you. Now, I have to leave before I can completely explore the mysteries of one dojo's." What's wrong with that? Although it's a bit lonely without you, I can still explore the dojos by myself. Don't worry about it. Luo Fan smiled. Battle God's son smiled apologetically and didn't stand on ceremony with Luo Fan. He bowed to Luo Fan and took a step forward. Golden light flashed around him, and he instantly disappeared in front of Luo Fan. Luo Fan looked up and traced his figure. His vision passed through the barriers of time and space and saw Battle God's son floating in the void outside of this continent. Battle God's strength continued to rise, and in the blink of an eye, he had recovered to his peak state. Then, he raised his hand and gently waved. The spirit avatars that he had split out earlier flew out of the continent and returned to his body. After doing all this, he nodded to where Luo Fan was, and his figure flashed, disappearing without a trace. Asking for guidance from the sage? If the sage can really point out the right path, why did Tian Hunzi die back then? Why do you still suffer such a shock because of this fact? After Battle God's son completely disappeared, Luo Fan thought to himself. This was what he wanted to say after hearing what Battle God's son had said. However, if he said it at that time, it would be an extremely cruel thing for Battle God's son. How could he bear to say it? I just hope that sect leader Tong Tian has a good way to help your mind recover. Luo Fan could only hope so in the end. He sighed and took a step forward. However, he didn't continue to stay in this surface space-time. Instead, he followed the connection between his spirit avatar and his body and directly broke through the layers of the void and arrived in that space-time. Although the power of his body was limited to below the immortal realm and was billions of times weaker than his normal peak strength, his realm was still there. However, his realm was still there, and his control over his power was superb. Coupled with the extremely close connection between his main body and his soul clone, it was extremely easy for him to break through the barrier between the outer space-time and the inner space-time. In fact, he did not even need to expend much energy before he arrived beside his clone. As soon as he entered the inner space-time, the mechanism that restricted his power completely disappeared. In an instant, his power completely recovered to its peak state. The wonderful feeling of the Tao Master Realm returned to his body. At this moment, Luo Fan suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of happiness. The moment of recovery from loss was originally the happiest moment. Feeling this kind of happiness, Luo Fan couldn't even care about his dissatisfaction with what Tian Hunzi did. He couldn't help but reveal a faint smile on his face. The moment his original body arrived, his avatar trembled slightly and turned invisible. It returned to his body, leaving only a pebble where the avatar had been. That pebble was clearly the Grotto Heaven treasure that contained the Qian family's treasure. Chapter 1085. After the space fused with the Spirit Mountain Blessed Land, the many living beings living in it were equivalent to living in a protected location within the Spirit Mountain Blessed Land. They had the same level of security as the inside of the Spirit Mountain Blessed Land, but they could also freely enter and exit without being shackled. This was the method Luo Fan thought of to deal with the Qian family. He no longer needed the soul avatar, so it was naturally impossible for him to still treat Qian Tong and his wife as his own parents. Giving them such great benefits and a bright future was already the most benevolent thing he could do. After doing all this, he didn't care about how Qian Tong and the others reacted and turned to look at Tian Hunzi. He saw Tian Hunzi looking at him with a smile, a hint of admiration and surprise in his eyes. The Tao you cultivate is very strange. I've never seen such a Tao before, Tian Hunzi said. What Luo Fan had appeared in front of him before was only a soul avatar, but what he cultivated was the cultivation system developed in this Tao field. Therefore, although he could see what level Luo Fan's essence had reached, he couldn't clearly see what Tao he cultivated. At this moment, when Luo Fan's main body appeared in front of him, he sensed something. That's not important. You were condensed from my array, and the purpose of condensing you is for this. Everything else is secondary. Luo Fan raised his hand and pointed to the space behind Tian Hunzi that contained the power of the devil. Tian Hunzi looked back and chuckled. So this still exists. I've finally seen something I'm familiar with. Congratulations. What is this? What happened back then? Luo Fan asked with a frown. Tian Hunzi raised his hand and beckoned. Strands of strange energy appeared out of nowhere in the void. The power was calm, but it also contained a boundless destructive intent. After it left that area, the space there trembled slightly, and it seemed as if it was about to collapse. Tian Hunzi raised his hand and made a grabbing motion. The power condensed into a ball in his palm and turned into a transparent ball. It was crystal clear, and one could faintly see all kinds of incredible scenes occurring and disappearing within it. Gotcha! Suddenly, The region that was originally extremely stable suddenly collapsed, turning into a cloud of dust that constantly churned. The entire region was completely enveloped in a strange mist, and it seemed to have completely lost its original appearance. It was a long while later before the dense fog gradually disappeared. That area also became no different from the rest of the area. That was the stability of space-time. There was nothing special about it. This is the power of the paramount demon sovereign. Tian Hunzi didn't care about the changes behind him at all. He just rubbed the transparent ball of energy that had condensed in his palm. Supreme Demon Lord? Luo Fan frowned. He suddenly had an inexplicable feeling. This title must be very unfamiliar to you, said Tian Hunzi with a smile. The Supreme Demon Sovereign is a Tao immortal of the demon world. It is roughly equivalent to the cultivators of our world who have reached the peak of the ninth step. Moreover, because the demon sovereign's nature was destruction, their strength was much stronger than ordinary cultivators who had reached the peak of the ninth step. For someone like you, a single thought would be enough to kill you. Luo Fan frowned again. I see. Then, the one who killed you back then was the Supreme Demon Sovereign? Tian Hunzi chuckled. How was that possible? I had only set foot on the eighth step back then. The difference between me and the Supreme Demon Sovereign was like the difference between heaven and earth. If the Supreme Demon Sovereign had come in person, I wouldn't have been able to leave even a trace of my will behind. My entire dojo would have become a vassal of the demon world. How could I still be like this? Luo Fan's heart skipped a beat. And the power of the Supreme Demon Sovereign? It wasn't the Supreme Demon Sovereign himself. Was it a clone or projection? I believe you've guessed it. That's right. The one who came here is only a projection of the Supreme Demon Sovereign. Tian Hunzi smiled. Why do I see that you look so happy? Luo Fan muttered to himself. He was shocked, but his words were merciless. Isn't it worth being happy about? For a cultivator who wants to die, isn't dying in the hands of the strongest opponent the best choice? Tian Hunzi smiled. That's only a projection of him. The power it contains is less than 1% of his. Luo Fan said. To be precise, it's 1 in 10,000. Tian Hunzi was still smiling happily. However, the Supreme Demon Sovereign is the Supreme Demon Sovereign. Even if it's just a projection, he is still the Supreme Demon Sovereign. His superior nature is enough to make up for the difference in strength. What's the difference between dying in his hands and dying in the hands of the Supreme Demon Sovereign? Moreover, most importantly, I made him look extremely pathetic in the process. I trapped him in this dojo for billions of years. Isn't that something to be happy about? Ha ha ha! Luo Fan heard this and came to a realization. Then he was shocked. The Supreme Demon Sovereign's projection is still in this dojo. How is that possible? He exclaimed. Of course, if he wasn't here, how could the power still be so agile and stable? Tian Hunzi smiled. Where is he now? Luo Fan wasn't in the mood to discuss these things with him. At this moment, he already had the thought of leaving the dojo immediately. An existence that could easily destroy a cultivator on the eighth step, even if it was just a projection, was not something he could fight against. Facing such an opponent, it wasn't like he had to fight. Why would Luo Fan be willing to risk his life here? Where is he now? Can't you feel it? Tian Hunzi smiled and asked. Luo Fan frowned and suddenly looked down at the strange space below. So you found out. Let's go and see where the Supreme Demon Sovereign is now. Tian Hunzi smiled. As he spoke, he raised his hand and grabbed at the void. Instantly, a strange door appeared in front of him and Luo Fan. This door distorted space and time, directly connecting this location with a location that was extremely far away. Tian Hunzi was just a memory-condensed body and didn't have much power. However, in this dojo, he was the absolute master and had absolute authority. With a thought, he could naturally mobilize the dojo's power to form a space-time door. Luo Fan hesitated for a moment. He still followed Tian Hunzi and went through the space-time door with him. The moment they passed through the door, the surrounding light and shadow changed. He faintly felt as if he had passed through billions of light years. When the surrounding light and shadow changed and stopped, he found himself in a strange void. This part of the void was completely different from the void they had seen before. The void before was a void where space-time was so fragile that it couldn't exist stably. It was a void that was extremely high up in the sky. However, the void here was a void where space-time was extremely stable. It was a void that existed extremely deep underground. High up in the sky, a boundless piece of land floated in the air as if it was suppressing everything. Below this void, an extremely huge giant was lying on the ground. This giant had the appearance of a born Taoism aptitude. It looked no different from a normal living creature. However, it was wearing a strange full-body armor and had an inexplicable sense of destruction as its eyes were tightly shut. It was as if the essence of its existence was to destroy the heavens, destroy everything, and destroy everything. This giant was so huge that it wasn't much smaller than the floating land above it. Lying there, Luo Fan and Tianhunzi floated above it like two tiny specks of dust. They seemed so insignificant. It's really here. Luo Fan couldn't help but sigh as he sensed his surroundings. When he stepped into the space-time, he vaguely sensed that there was an extremely terrifying thing under the land. He initially thought it was some treasure in this dojo, but he didn't expect it to be a body like this. I didn't expect it to be so huge because of power. It seems like its power has been almost depleted, Tianhun said in surprise when he saw the giant. This person is the projection of the Supreme Demon Venerable. Luo Fan frowned and asked, "Of course. Who else could it be? You can't be thinking that it's my body, right?" Tianhunzi laughed. "I wouldn't have suspected it if you hadn't mentioned it, but now that you've mentioned it, I have some ideas," Luo Fan said plainly as he glanced at him. "Haha, you're funny." Tianhunzi laughed. "Why did the Supreme Demon Venerable come to this dojo? To cause trouble for you back then?" Luo Fan couldn't be bothered with him and asked, "I don't know about that. Perhaps it was his destructive nature that urged him to come here, or perhaps it was because he didn't see eye to eye with me. As an existence with a nature of destruction, it wouldn't be strange if he did something unbelievable." Tianhunzi didn't care about such an important reason. Luo Fan couldn't help but feel annoyed when he heard this. He almost wanted to activate the formation that formed Tianhunzi to completely destroy him. Fortunately, he knew that there were still many things that he could only find out by asking him. He forcefully resisted the urge to destroy. "Let's not talk about him for now. The Supreme Demon Venerable's current state should be because he's being suppressed by the dojo, right?" Luo Fan continued to ask. "Of course. Look at him now. The power in his body has been depleted to the extreme, and his will has been weakened to the extreme. He can't even control his projection now. He can only lie there quietly and let us comment on him," Tianhunzi said. "Why do I feel that's not the case?" Luo Fan frowned and said, "Oh, how do you feel?" Tianhunzi asked curiously. "I realize that his power is slowly recovering. The entire dojo is currently going through some strange changes. It seems like its nature is going to change," Luo Fan said calmly. Tianhunzi's expression changed when he heard this. He closed his eyes and sensed quietly for a while. Suddenly, a look of shock appeared on his face. "As expected," he exclaimed. His eyes were filled with shock and fear as he looked at the giant below. "It seems like my feeling was right." Luo Fan finally sighed when he saw Tianhunzi's reaction. What he said before was only a guess. As an outsider, he was very unfamiliar with everything in this dojo. He had no idea what this dojo originally looked like. Therefore, he could completely break free from the shackles of the original world and clearly sense the nature of this dojo. When he was in outer space, he sensed that the nature of these continents had vaguely broken away from the path of spirits. In fact, when he first stepped into this dojo, he even suffered some unknown attacks. On the continent that restricted the use of power above the celestial realm, he also sensed that the divine demon sect seemed to have a connection with some kind of power and obtained some unknown benefits from the outside world. He originally thought that there would be some answers after coming to this space-time. However, after coming here, he realized that the puzzles were still puzzles. He still had to find the answers. It was completely different from what he had guessed before. This meant that there was an even deeper secret in this Taoist right ground that was above the space-time here. It was these secrets that caused the puzzles that he could not solve. They caused the places that he was confused about. Clearly, any riddle, any inconceivable matter would have an answer and a fundamental reason. That was why he dared to make such a bold guess and said those words. However, when Tian Hunzi confirmed his guess, his expression still turned extremely ugly. I didn't expect that to be the case. It seems like I have to leave this dojo as soon as possible, thought Luo Fan. I didn't expect such a change to happen after so many years. Why is the projection of the Supreme Demon Lord able to recover its strength without any external help? That shouldn't be possible. Tian Hunzi was frowning as he muttered to himself. Could it be that the legendary Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth is coming? Suddenly, Tian Hunzi's expression changed. He cried out in surprise. Hearing this, Luo Fan was shocked and said, "What does this have to do with the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth? Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth? Wouldn't another Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth arrive after billions of years? Moreover, this Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth caused the destruction of the entire Earth's universe. It changed the Earth's universe from its original state of having a round sky and a square Earth into a boundless universe. The consequences were really earth-shattering. It would bring disaster to millions of generations. Yes, that must be it. As the Supreme Demon Lord of the Devil Realm, his essence is the power of the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth. Naturally, he can sense the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth. If the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth comes, he will naturally be stimulated, and his strength will naturally recover." Tianhun muttered, but his expression kept changing. The Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth was extremely meaningful to Tianhunzi. Although he had never personally experienced any Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth, he couldn't be more familiar with the residual power of the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth. Even his own death was caused by the residual power of the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth. Under such circumstances, he couldn't be more familiar with the terror of the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth. At this moment, when he heard that the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth was coming, he really felt the fear of the end of the world. Suddenly, Tianhunzi came to his senses and heaved a sigh of relief. An extremely relaxed smile appeared on his face. He said, "How could I forget? I'm already dead. Even if the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth comes, what effect will it have on me?" When Luo Fan heard this, he couldn't help but be stunned. Then he smiled bitterly. Originally, when he saw the horrified and almost hysterical look on Tianhunzi, he felt that Tianhunzi was a little different. He seemed more like a real living being with flesh and blood. He didn't expect that Tianhunzi would actually change back in just a few words. He couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. But forget it. Since this place is so dangerous, I'd better leave this Taoist rite. As for what happens to the Supreme Demon Venerable, the Demon Realm, and the Great Tribulation of Heaven and Earth, what does that have to do with me? As Luo Fan thought of this, he said to Tianhunzi, "This place is very dangerous. I want to leave. What are your plans? Do you need me to stabilize the formation of the residual will so that you can stay longer?" Tianhunzi was stunned when he heard Luo Fan's words. Then he looked at Luo Fan in disbelief and said, "You want to leave? Why? Can't I?" Luo Fan frowned. "You met a Supreme Demon Venerable of the Demon Realm. He's suppressed in front of you, and you can do whatever you want to him. You can easily refine him, but you actually want to leave?" Tianhun continued to look at him in disbelief. "First of all, I'm not interested in the Supreme Demon Venerable's power. The Supreme Demon Venerable's innate quality is too high. Moreover, he's not dead yet. The risks and benefits of dealing with him are not proportional at all. It's not something that a wise person would do. Secondly, This is just a projection of the supreme demon venerable. Although I don't know what method you used to cut off the connection between his body and the projection, I'm sure that you must have paid a huge price for it. If I refine it, the price will definitely be transferred to me. However, I'm not absolutely confident that I can afford it. Thirdly, I have a great future ahead of me. There are countless Taoist rites waiting for me to explore. I can't even reap the benefits that are not dangerous. Why should I hang myself in this Taoist right until I die? Luo Fan said calmly. Tian Hunzi was momentarily stunned. The way he looked at Luo Fan kept changing. There was disbelief, admiration, disdain, and speechlessness.